Chapter 13:11. While Xiaohua was asking about Fan Riguan, the shuttle under his feet was suddenly lifted up by the huge waves on the lake and thrown high into the air. Xiaohua himself was also thrown straight towards the light shield on the opposite side. Similarly, Fan Riguan was also thrown towards him from the opposite direction. The two people were inevitably going to collide in midair. If it was an ordinary cultivator, let alone a second-level qi refining cultivator, even if it was a foundation establishment cultivator, under the situation where they didn't use their transcendence energy, wouldn't they also be flustered and barely mobilize their transcendence energy to cast a spell? Even if they could save themselves, Fan Riguan probably couldn't save them. Xiaohua was different. In a hurry, he didn't have time to take out a flying talisman from his storage pouch. He also didn't have any technique to float in the air. Although he was a little busy, his hands and feet weren't slow at all. It was simply faster than he thought. It was unknown what Xiaohua's hands and feet did, but his whole body immediately recovered its balance. Moreover, when Fan Riguan was about to crash into him, Xiaohua slightly raised his hand and grabbed Fan Riguan's neck. His hand gently stopped Fan Riguan from flying diagonally. Then, Xiaohua's figure lightly floated to the ground. Fan Riguan's face was pale as he stood steadily on the flying shuttle in the air. Xiaohua's series of movements were like moving clouds and flowing water, as if he didn't see the smoke and fire of the mortal world. It was as if there was a spell activated by transcendence energy. As soon as he stepped on the shuttle, Fan Riguan hurriedly thanked him. Before he could finish speaking, there was a "pa" sound and the shuttle fell on the lake again. It violently undulated up and down, but it didn't float forward even half an inch. Huh? What's going on? Xiaohua raised his head in surprise. The entire lake was still rippling. There were many different colored shuttles around Xiaohua, but like Xiaohua, they only undulated in place and didn't float. Ah, Jen, do you know what's going on? Xiaohua asked curiously. This little one doesn't know. This little one is sitting on very few immortal things. Just as Fan Riguan was replying, the light shield above the shuttle scattered down, revealing Xiaohua and Fan Riguan on the surface of the lake. A burst of water vapor and a gust of wind blew over, making Xiaohua and Fan Riguan's faces wet, and their clothes fluttered in the wind. At this time, about 10 feet in front of the shuttle, a water curtain slowly rose up. A Jinghua city disciple's figure appeared in the water curtain. Fellow Taoists, our city lord is accompanying a distinguished guest on a tour of Jinghua city. Please wait a moment. Please be magnanimous and forgive us. A clear and melodious voice came from the water curtain, echoing in Xiaohua's ears. Honored guest sightseeing? Xiaohua frowned, immediately recalling the warning he received from the Jinghua city disciple on the street just now. Before he could think about it carefully, a string of music that made one feel relaxed and happy came from extremely far away. At first, it was as soft as a mosquito, but soon after, it became louder, as if many people were playing a celestial song in front of him. However, even if Xiaohua used his eyes, he still could not find the source of this celestial music. Huh? Over there. Although he couldn't see anything unusual with his naked eyes, Xiaohua still raised his eyes and looked towards the north. He saw a tricolored light slowly flying over from the north. It seemed to be moving very slowly, but in a flash, it was already in front of him. It was a dragon-shaped flying boat. The flying boat was quite tall, but it was transparent. The people on the flying boat could be seen clearly by the people in the lake, as if the flying boat didn't exist. The flying boat wasn't flying in the sky. Below the flying boat, there were several feet of clouds floating above the lake. The clouds flowed more rapidly than the water, pushing the flying boat forward rapidly. Xiaohua's eyes were sharp. He had already seen clearly that there were more than 10 foundation establishment cultivators standing on the dragon head of the flying boat. Each of them held a sword-shaped magic tool in their hands. Their faces were tense as they looked forward. There were also cultivators on both sides of the flying boat, but these cultivators' magic tools were in the shape of a Rui scepter. In the center of these cultivators was an enormous platform. On the platform, there were several beautiful women with graceful figures. Their cultivations were also at the late stage of qi refining and early stage of foundation establishment. They either held a feather fan in their hands or a wine jug in their hands. They clustered around 3 people sitting cross-legged in the center of the platform. Looking at the 3 people, the one at the top was an old man with white hair and a red face. He wore a purple-red Taoist robe and sat very casually. He held a strange golden wine cup in his left hand and pointed at something in the lake with his right hand. This old man was the famous old man Mu Chang of Jingbo City. On old man Mu Chang's left hand was an extremely handsome boy. He wore a luxurious robe, his face was as white as jade, and he had a purple gold crown on his head. He was holding a bunch of spirit fruits that looked like grapes in his hand and carefully tasting them with an expressionless face. This almost young boy was the city lord of Jingbo City, Lu Yichuan. Looking at the opposite side of city lord Lu, there was a middle-aged man about 40 years old. He had a horse face with many pockmarks on his face. In the middle of the pockmarks was a very conspicuous brandy nose. It was the 3rd elder of the Blue Li sect, Taoist Master Zhuo Ming. At this time, Taoist Master Zhuo Ming was also holding a wine cup in his hand. His Taoist robe was open at his chest and he seemed to be drinking to his heart's content. His gaze was directed at the direction old man Mu Chang was pointing at. Xiao Hua looked from afar and thought to himself, this is the so-called nascent soul cultivator. Looks like, it's just strange, but there's nothing special about it. Xiao Hua had just thought of this when an incomparably majestic pressure pressed down on him like a mountain and like a huge wave hitting the shore. In an instant, Xiao Hua felt that his entire body was incomparably heavy. That pressure pressed down on his entire body. Even his fingers and toes were unable to move a single inch. What's more, Xiao Hua's mind was as if exposed. His mouth and nose were immersed in the pressure, making him unable to think, unable to breathe. With a plop sound, behind Xiao Hua, the mortal Fan Riguan had long been unable to resist the pressure of a nascent soul cultivator. He shouted, "Old immortal!" and couldn't help but kneel on the ground, truly prostrating himself on all fours. This is the divine ability of a nascent soul cultivator. It's simply unbelievable. Xiao Hua, who had some doubts just now, was completely shocked in his heart. There was no need to talk about fighting. Just based on this pressure, Xiao Hua believed that as long as the 3 people on the dragon boat wanted his life, they only needed to wave their hands and he definitely wouldn't have any strength to fight back. Not to mention me, even if the sect master were here, I'm afraid he wouldn't be a match for them in 3 rounds. Xiao Hua had already deeply understood the fearsomeness of a nascent soul cultivator. At the same time, he also understood that when Xiao Yuehong mentioned the nascent soul sect masters of the 3 great cultivation sects in the country of Xi, his tone was filled with admiration, jealousy, and a bit of fear. Foundation establishment. Gold core, compared to the nascent soul stage, the difference was really too great. Suddenly, Xiao Hua's eyes flashed with a burst of blazing passion, as if he had seen some hope. That's right, it's exactly like this. It's precisely because of this cultivation that I can avenge the sect master. I can move unhindered in this whatever country of Xi, in this whatever continent of Dawn Reign. Only then can I possibly find my own origin and origin. Xiao Hua let out a cry from his heart. Sect master, this disciple finally understands your words. Only by becoming a great cultivator can I have my own freedom and do whatever I want. Rest assured, this disciple will definitely not be afraid of hardships and dangers. I will definitely use all my means to cultivate to the nascent soul stage. I will definitely personally crush the 100 Herbs sect. Jiang Fan, Jiang Jiantong, and the others to death one by one, so as to avenge you and let you rest in peace in the underworld. The dragon boat was moving extremely fast. Xiao Hua had just seen the 3 nascent soul cultivators on the dragon boat and was thinking so much in his heart when the dragon boat had already flown past Xiao Hua's shuttle boat at an extremely fast speed. Soon after, the extremely terrifying pressure was like the receding tide of the sea, suddenly disappearing. Xiaohua felt his body become lighter and his heart also relaxed. When he turned his head to look again, the three-colored flying boat had already gradually moved further away and could only be vaguely seen. The head of a dragon can be seen but the tail cannot be seen, isn't this what it looks like? Xiaohua sighed with emotion. With a pu sound, the light blue light around the shuttle once again rose up and surrounded the entire shuttle. It slightly shook a few times and just like before, the shuttle flew forward at an extremely fast speed. On the surface of the lake, all the shuttles also began to move as if nothing had happened just a moment ago. Behind Xiaohua, Fan Riguan was still lying on the ground. His shoulders were slightly trembling, and he still hadn't escaped from the fright from a moment ago. Xiaohua knew that the pressure of a nascent soul cultivator was extremely powerful. It must have left an extremely deep impression in Fan Riguan's heart. In a short period of time, he probably wouldn't be able to recover his previous state of mind. Therefore, Xiaohua didn't say anything and just stood there quietly. Looking ahead, his heart once again surged with monstrous waves. I naturally want to cultivate to the nascent soul stage, but the current situation is extremely bad. I only have the cultivation method of the second level of qi refining. If I want to continue cultivating, I need to find the cultivation method for the future. Let's not talk about the cultivation method for the foundation establishment stage, I must obtain the cultivation method for the 12th level of qi refining. But, cultivation methods are incomparably precious in the country of Xi. Usually, I may not be able to obtain it, no, I definitely can't obtain it. And, if I enter another sect, my aptitude seems strange. I'm afraid it won't be easy. So, Heaven's Forsaken seems to be the only way out right now. As long as I can pass Senior Qing's test on the art of talisman crafting, I can obtain the cultivation method for the 5th level of qi refining. This young master can even refine a high-grade fireball talisman, not to mention a low-grade one. Ah. Oh no, how could I be so muddle-headed? Thinking of this, Xiaohua suddenly came to a realization. Although he could refine a high-grade fireball talisman, this kind of miraculous method, could he display it in front of others? If he wanted to enter Heaven's Forsaken, his only chance was to use a talisman brush to refine a low-grade fireball talisman. Chapter 13:12. Although Xiaohua can refine high-grade fireball talismans, he absolutely can't let others know about this. After all, his method of refining yellow talismans is somewhat unimaginable. He can only use talisman brushes to refine low-grade fireball talismans in order to meet the requirements of joining Tian Qi. Alas, it's really like drawing legs on a snake. Xiaohua rubbed his chin, unconsciously smiling bitterly as he said, forcefully returning that low-grade talisman brush to Senior Tian was precisely to make him believe that the high-grade fireball talisman wasn't refined by himself. This lack of confidence isn't ordinary at all. Now, I've lost 20 low-grade spirit stones for no reason, and now I have to buy a low-grade talisman brush. I'm just finding something for myself to do. Forget it, don't think so much first. When I return to the southern part of the city tomorrow, I'd better find a shop to buy a talisman brush. If Tian Qi sends a summoning talisman and I can't refine yellow talismans normally, then it'll be troublesome. Right, my cultivation relied on the Peiyuan pill to push from the first layer of the aura refining realm to the second layer of the aura refining realm. Taking the Peiyuan pill is equivalent to 12 years of bitter cultivation. If I go from the second layer of the aura refining realm to the third layer of the aura refining realm, how many years of bitter cultivation do I have to take? Can I still use the Peiyuan pill? Xiaohua frowns and thinks, Shanghuaming is already gone, and everything in Yellow Flower Ridge has been taken away by my enemy. I can't easily get pills anymore. If I want to take pills, I'll have to rely on myself. And, since I can refine yellow talismans that I've never learned before, then I think about the extremely familiar spells in Xihua Peak's pill room. Presumably, I can also refine pills. Even if I can't refine pills now, I still have to collect as many pill recipes as I can. I need to collect things for pill refining in the future. Loose cultivators, everything depends on oneself. Everything is cruel. Right, 100 Zhang Peak. Kai Zhuoxia's matter, do I still have to go? Xiaohua thought about the matter of cultivation techniques, then he thought about Kai Zhuoxia and the 100 Zhang Peak. Previously, I had a disciple of the sect. The sect head had a cultivation technique, so I naturally didn't need to go to the 100 Zhang Peak and risk my life. But now, I've already become a loose cultivator, and I'm even inferior to Kai Zhuoxia. If I can go to 1000 Zhang Peak and coincidentally obtain old man 1000 Zhang's inheritance, wouldn't I no longer have to rack my brains to find all the cultivation methods in the future? But Kai Zhuoxia is at the 5th level of qi refining. She also needs a technique like this. She must have noticed that my cultivation base is too low to compete with hers, so she invited me to go with her. Even if I have a secret technique to break through her cultivation base, she already knows about it. She'll definitely be on her guard. How could I possibly have an advantage? Since you can't snatch it from him, why should you destroy the trust that the two of you have worked so hard to build? Sigh, forget it, I won't go. In any case, my cultivation speed is too slow. Just relying on Tianqi's cultivation method is more than enough. Why should I think about other things? If Kai Zhuoxia's luck is good, then I'll let her obtain old man 1000 Zhang's inheritance and revitalize their Kai family of Luyang. His eyes blankly stared at the lingering mist in front of him. His eyes gradually became clear. Everyone's cultivation path has its own characteristics. Simply copying another person's path may not necessarily be successful. I must have my own path. All of a sudden, Xiaohua became extremely interested in the reward that Fan Riguan's mother wanted to give him. He didn't know what it was, and he also didn't know if it would have any effect on his cultivation. He turned his head to look at Fan Riguan. Although he had already stood up from the ground, his eyes were still somewhat lifeless. The pressure of a nascent soul cultivator was still too shocking for ordinary people. Without a period of time to recover, Fan Riguan's mind wouldn't be able to escape from the shock. For a moment, Xiaohua also didn't want to ask him anything. Just like this, the two of them remained silent, allowing the shuttle to quickly advance on the surface of the lake. Time passed very quickly. When the bright red sun set in the west, a black line appeared in front of Xiaohua's eyes. It was precisely the end of the lake. That black line was getting closer. When he could clearly see that it was the countless houses built along the lakeside. Turning his head to look at Fan Riguan, Xiaohua thought for a moment. He slightly frowned and shouted with a trace of magic power in his voice, "Ah Jen, ah." When the wooden chicken Fan Riguan heard Xiaohua's shout, he suddenly woke up with a start. His sluggish eyes faintly moved and regained some spirit. Immediately after, he looked left and right in panic and said in a low voice, "Daoist Xiao, have the old immortals all left?" "And they've left." Xiaohua nodded. He finally understood the almighty power of cultivators. That's good, that's good." Fan Riguan extended his hand to wipe away the non-existent sweat on his forehead. He said in shame, "When I was talking to Daoist Xiao just now, I was careless and directly called out City Lord Lu's name. Just now, City Lord Lu actually found out. Although he was magnanimous and didn't blame me, I was warned by City Lord Lu's anger in my heart. In the future, I won't dare to be so rude." That's fine." Xiaohua suddenly came to a realization. How could Lu Yichuan know that Fan Riguan had mentioned his name? It was only because Fan Riguan was under Lu Yichuan's pressure that a flaw appeared in his mind. He had a guilty conscience. If you don't do anything wrong, you won't be afraid of ghosts knocking on your door. The ancient saying is correct. Xiaohua naturally thought of his low-grade talisman pen. "Alright, City Lord Lu has already forgiven you. You don't have to blame yourself. Let's see if this is Jing Fanqi. Xiaohua smiled and pointed forward. So fast. Fan Riguan was stunned. He raised his head and looked. Unconsciously, his face was filled with joy. Daoist Xiao, you know that this is Jing Fanqi. Xiaohua listened and didn't say anything. He folded his hands and looked at the gradually approaching lake. Jing Fanqi's lake was extremely large. The shore couldn't be seen with a single glance. However, apart from Xiaohua's shuttle, no other shuttle was approaching. It was obvious that this was a rare sight. Daoist Xiao, this is the place where mortals like me live. In the past, only when Jingbo City came to select disciples, the immortals would come here. Yesterday, an immortal. I didn't know that they came directly to Jing Fanqi. It was only because of my earnest request that they sent me back. Fan Riguan explained as the shuttle reached the shore. Looking at the empty lake shore, he explained. Xiaohua nodded. Seeing the shuttle's light screen descend, he jumped out of the shuttle. His figure was very agile. Xiaohua was in midair. He couldn't help but feel a little worried. Just now, when the shuttle hit the huge wave, he didn't use any magic power. Even under that kind of situation, he was still able to nimbly swim in midair. He even caught Fan Riguan with great ease. That feeling, it was as if he had another kind of divine ability. Oh, it was as if he had another kind of ability. He didn't think about it before. Now that he thought about it, it was really a little mysterious. There are still a lot of things that can be discovered from me. After Xiaohua landed on the ground, he shook his head slightly. When he turned his head back, Fan Riguan also jumped down from the shuttle. In a hurry, the surface of the lake below the shuttle was the same as when the shuttle appeared. Countless bubbles gushed out, and then a light blue brilliance appeared, and the shuttle disappeared. Casually glancing at the similar pillar beside him, Xiaohua smiled and said, "Ah Zhen, this is your home. You should act as the host." Of course. Daoist Xiao, please follow me." Fan Riguan smiled. Looking at the familiar building in front of him, his eyes showed a trace of warmth. He quickly stepped forward and led Xiaohua inside. There was still some distance between the buildings on the shore, and this empty space didn't have any traces of people. The two walked quickly for a moment and approached the buildings. Reflecting the setting sun in the west, Xiaohua squinted his eyes. He very keenly saw that several zhang ahead, there was a thin light screen that separated the sunlight into 7 colors. Suddenly, Xiaohua came to a realization. He recalled that when he fainted on Xihua Peak, some things had happened in the space behind his head. Bone refining 7 colors, could it be related to the 7 colors in this light? Daoist Xiao, in front of us is Jing Fanqi's immortal formation. Without the immortal residence issued by Jingbo City, no mortal can pass through. Fan Riguan, who was walking in front of Xiaohua, stopped and turned back. However, for an immortal elder like Daoist Xiao, this immortal formation is ineffective. Please rest assured. Oh. Is that so? Xiaohua discovered that as long as it was an array formation in Jingbo City, there would always be some Jingbo City disciples hidden. Therefore, he wouldn't easily reveal that he had seen the array formation. Then, your yellow talisman, did you get it from the Flying Fish Inn? Daoist Xiao, you can't get the immortal talisman from Flying Fish Inn to enter Jing Fanqi. I got it from Jingbo City near Flying Fish Inn. Oh, I see. Xiaohua nodded. With quick steps, the two arrived in front of the formation. Fan Riguan didn't stop. He didn't take out any yellow talisman and was about to pass through the formation. Xiaohua was about to stop him when he saw a burst of light flowing on the light screen. An old man of about 40 years old appeared on the light screen. That old man was wearing the disciples' uniform of Jingbo City. His divine sense swept over Xiaohua's body. Then, he said with some surprise, "Fellow Taoist. Why did you come to Jing Fanqi of Jingbo City?" Before Xiaohua could say anything, Fan Riguan, who had already passed through the light screen, immediately bowed and said, "Greetings, old immortal. I invited Taoist Xiao to treat my wife and daughter." "Shut up. Who asked you to speak?" the old man shouted angrily like a clap of thunder. Fan Riguan was shocked. His knees went soft and he knelt on the ground. That old man's cultivation was at the middle stage of the foundation establishment realm. His angry shout also gave Xiaohua a fright. Xiaohua also hurriedly stepped forward and saluted. He cupped his hands and said, "Junior Xiaohua greets senior." You have the ability to treat illnesses?" The old man's voice was full of contempt. "Old immortal." Fan Riguan was about to speak again, but how could Xiaohua allow him to speak? He hurriedly interjected, "Senior, this one should still go and take a look. Whether or not it can be cured, it's still up to fate." Chapter 13:13. You're just a junior in the second layer of qi refining, how can you be so powerful?" the old man said coldly. Xiaohua smiled and said, "Junior heard from Fan Riguan that as long as one is a cultivator, one can enter Jing Fan Qi. Although Junior is only in the second layer of qi refining and my cultivation is shallow, I can still be considered to have stepped into the door of cultivation. Could it be that Junior can't enter?" My Jingbo city naturally has this kind of rule. However, since I am guarding this area, of course I have to make decisions for the people of my Jingbo city. I can't let anyone who is harmful to my people enter." The old man's tone was a little angry. "What harmful person?" "It's just that this young master's cultivation is shallow." Xiaohua's heart was like a mirror. He chuckled and cupped his hands and said, "Junior is from a medical family. Since young, I have been identifying medicinal herbs with this grandfather and learning medical skills. It's also because of this background that I was chosen by the sect and accepted into the sect. However, because Junior is too immersed in this, my cultivation has been slow to improve. I've let Senior see a joke." Alas, Xiaohua's lies at this time, one after another. He didn't even need to think about it in his heart, he just blurted it out directly. "So it's like this." The old man muttered to himself and stared at Xiaohua for a long time. Xiaohua was not timid. He opened his eyes wide and looked at the old man's distorted figure very calmly. "Go," the old man waved his hand. His figure gradually rose and disappeared. Taoist Master Xiao. Fan Riguan had been a waiter for many years. Just now, when he saw Xiaohua stop him from saying that he had already cured his mother, he felt that there was something wrong. He said somewhat embarrassedly, "Did I cause trouble for Senior Immortal?" "Oh, it's like this." When Xiaohua heard Fan Riguan mention it, he sighed and said, "Although I'm the immortal elder you speak of, my actual cultivation is still not enough. Therefore, the matter of curing your mother's illness, and the matter of your wife and daughter, you must not tell anyone else. You have to know that this is not a good reputation for I, but a disaster for I." "Yes, I know. Before I came here, my mother had told me not to reveal anything. Xiao Qian in the inn, the waiter like me asked, and I told him that you had nothing to do with my mother's illness." Fan Riguan said hurriedly, "It's just that just now I was panicking, so I almost said it." Xiaohua understood Fan Riguan's urgency. He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to enter Jing Fan Qi's territory, so he waved his hand and said, "It's fine. I'm not from Jingbo City anyway. You can wait for 5 to 6 years. It won't be too late for you to wait until I leave." "No, I swear that I will never say it again," Fan Riguan said resolutely. That's good." Xiaohua understood in his heart that cultivators had countless ways to make him talk, but the problem was, who would be so bored? "Oh right, this Madame Fan Riguan's mother, what kind of person is she?" "Unexpectedly, her mind is so meticulous. She seems to have some understanding of the world of cultivators." Xiaohua thought, however, Jingbo City is a place of cultivators. Jinghua City often chooses disciples from Jingfan Qi, so it's normal for her to know the cruelty of cultivators. Let's go, your family must be waiting anxiously. Xiaohua waved his hand and said. Yes, please follow me, Daoist Xiao. Fan Riguan's face was filled with gratitude as he bowed and asked Xiaohua to follow him. After walking for a while with Fan Riguan, the two figures gradually disappeared into a cluster of buildings. As Xiaohua gradually went deeper, he also looked at the surroundings with interest. This was a place that looked like a town. The streets were very small, completely different from the streets in other parts of Jinghua City. On both sides of the street were houses and shops, which was not much different from what Xiaohua had imagined. Moreover, there were more and more people in the surroundings. They all looked like ordinary people, and there were different kinds of people. This was a secular town. Although Xiaohua was wearing an ordinary Taoist robe and there was nothing special about it among cultivators, in this secular town, it was out of place. In addition, he was very tall, so when he walked in the crowd, he stood out like a crane among chickens. Everyone could see him early on, especially that big bald head. The attitude of the crowd made Xiaohua feel a little strange. When these people saw him, they were all very respectful. Many of them also stopped and cupped their hands to salute him. Xiaohua also smiled and saluted at first, but later on, there were too many people. He really couldn't cope with them, so he could only smile and nod. Fortunately, these people's eyes were full of reverence. After saluting him, they all left. They didn't crowd around him like stars surrounding the moon. Presumably, Jingfan Qi also had no lack of cultivators coming here. Daoist Xiao, please come this way. Fan Riguan walked in front of Xiaohua, his face was very proud. When they reached a not too small street, he turned his head and said with a smile. Yes, Xiaohua nodded. He was also very happy in his heart. This kind of respect made him feel quite emotional. Ever since he started cultivating, he was always looked down upon by others. When had he ever received this kind of treatment? The street wasn't too deep. Some men and women walked out. When they saw Fan Riguan, they all greeted him warmly. When they saw Xiaohua, they were even more surprised. They respectfully stood at the side and asked Xiaohua to go first. When they reached the end of the street, there was a not too big courtyard. Fan Riguan quickly walked a few steps and shouted, Mother, Mother, this boy has invited Daoist Xiao here. The door of the courtyard was opened with a hula sound. A middle-aged woman's face popped out from inside. Her face was full of disbelief, but when she saw Xiaohua behind Fan Riguan, her expression immediately changed to surprise. She quickly opened the door and shouted, Daoist Xiao, please come in. Daoist Xiao, please come in. I'll help my mother out. As she said that, she looked like she was crying tears of joy. She turned around and ran away with nimble steps. This little one's mother has been ill for many years. Yesterday, she took Daoist Xiao's elixir and can move freely. However, this little one still doesn't dare to let her move too much. Fan Riguan said very apologetically, therefore, I can't wait at the door for too long. I have to personally welcome Daoist Xiao. Hee, it's fine. Your wife's mother is an elder. How can I let her wait at the door? Xiaohua said indifferently. When Fan Riguan heard this, he immediately had a flattered expression. He really didn't expect that a high and mighty cultivator would be so amiable and approachable. He even treated his mother as an elder. Please, Daoist Xiao, please go first. Fan Riguan invited Xiaohua in with tears of gratitude. Father. A clear and melodious voice sounded. Before Xiaohua could take a step, the voice came from the courtyard. Xiaohua stopped with a smile on his face. Soon after, a 4 or 5-year-old little girl dressed in red and green with a little braid on her head ran out from the courtyard. When she saw Fan Riguan, she called out sweetly and opened her arms to ask for a hug. Don't make trouble. Fan Riguan's face was a little uneasy. He scolded, quickly come and greet Taoist Xiao. When the little girl heard her father's scolding, she stopped. Her small mouth twitched and her round eyes rolled around. She looked at Xiaohua from head to toe. Her eyes were full of surprise. Her small mouth opened, but she didn't say anything. She trotted a few steps and walked to Fan Riguan's side. She stretched her body and put her hand to her mouth, as if she wanted to whisper something to Fan Riguan. Taoist Xiao, this is a dog girl. Her name is Zhu Shi. She doesn't know much. Sorry for making you laugh. Fan Riguan hurriedly explained to Xiaohua. Seeing Zhu Shi, so naive, how could Xiaohua blame her? He just smiled and nodded. If you have something to say, just say it. Xiaohua asked. Zhu Shi, looked at Xiaohua and then looked at Fan Riguan. She said clearly, people say that Taoist Xiao is a white-bearded grandfather, but, why don't you have a beard? Not only do you not have a beard, you don't even have hair. This. Xiaohua didn't expect Zhu Shi, to ask about his hair. He was a little embarrassed. He then touched his bald head and said with a smile, that's because I am smarter than the average Taoist Xiao. Ah. Why? Zhu Shi, didn't understand. She suddenly blinked her two big eyes. It was very strange. Because, a smart head doesn't grow hair. Xiaohua said with a smile. Ah. So it's like that. Zhu Shi, obviously didn't hear this sentence. She turned her head and looked at Fan Riguan. At this time, Fan Riguan couldn't help but laugh. He wanted to laugh but didn't dare to. If he didn't laugh, he would panic. You're lying. Even Taoist Xiao doesn't lie. Zhu Shi, was very smart. She immediately saw through it and said with a pout. Don't be rude. An old voice came from the other side of the door. It was an urgent voice. An old woman with a head full of white hair walked out with the help of the middle-aged woman from before. She was trembling slightly. Grandma. Zhu Shi, shouted with grievance and ran to the old woman. Grandma. A very intimate, yet unfamiliar address flashed through Xiaohua's mind like a bolt of lightning. A fuzzy, kind face faintly flashed in Xiaohua's mind. Xiaohua had never thought that the address, grandmother, would have such a great effect on him. This is my grandma. The face in his mind was a little fuzzy and not clear. Xiaohua couldn't see it clearly no matter how hard he tried. The old woman ignored Zhu Shi, and stepped forward. She trembled and was about to kneel down and salute. Zhu Shi greets Taoist Xiao. Thank you Taoist Xiao for saving my life. Xiaohua was originally in a daze. He only woke up when he heard the voice. Seeing the old woman about to kneel down, he couldn't help but be shocked. He quickly supported her and said, I don't dare. Grandma is much older than I. How can you salute I? Moreover, I didn't mean to save you. I don't dare to accept such a big salute. Taoist Xiao, you are a Taoist Xiao. You can't talk about age with us mortals. Moreover, whether you did it on purpose or not, it is a fact that Taoist Xiao saved me. If I don't personally thank you, I won't feel at ease. Looking at the old woman with white hair, wrinkles all over her face, and the sincere expression in her eyes, Xiaohua thought for a moment and sighed. He loosened his hand and said, if you want to thank me, it's better to go to the courtyard first. The old woman came to her senses and hurriedly said, Immortal Elder is right, please. Chapter 13-14. Xiaohua didn't stand on ceremony and walked into the courtyard first. The courtyard wasn't big, but it was very neat and tidy. In the middle of the courtyard, there was a flourishing parasol tree full of vitality. Behind the parasol tree was a central room with an open door. Next to the central room were several small rooms with their doors closed. Just by looking at the things in the courtyard, Xiao Hua could see that Fan Riguan's family was well off. Taoist Xiao, please accept a bow from this old woman and her family. Without waiting for Xiao Hua to understand his surroundings, the aged voice of the Zhu clan's old woman rang out behind him. When Xiao Hua turned around, not only the Zhu clan's old woman, but also Fan Riguan's family of 3 were kneeling on the ground. Xiao Hua leaned to one side. He really didn't want such an old woman to bow to him. Then, he hurried forward and single-handedly helped the old woman up. The old woman stood up under Xiao Hua's unparalleled strength, and the middle-aged woman behind her also hurried forward to support her. The old woman let out a sigh of relief and said with a smile, Taoist Xiao, although this old woman is a layman, but I never wanted to take advantage of other people's kindness. Ah Jen, he asked for an immortal pill in the inn. I didn't like that at all, but this is a junior's filial piety. This old woman can't stop him. Then, she lovingly looked at Fan Riguan and sincerely said to Xiao Hua, Ah Jen must have already told me a bit about what happened in the past. I won't hide it from Taoist Xiao. In this old woman's eyes, cultivators are the most stingy. For a little bit of benefit, they can draw their swords and even fight with their lives. Therefore, this old woman has never given them any extravagant hope. However, yesterday, Ah Jen actually brought back an immortal pill and cured this old woman's chronic illness. This is really beyond my expectations. Taoist Xiao's noble character and unquestionable integrity, your magnanimity really, made this old woman change her previous impression of cultivators. Alas, old woman's words also make I blush with shame. Xiao Hua waved his hand and said, cultivators go against the will of the heavens. Everyone is trying to seize the first opportunity of the heavenly Tao. If someone is lenient, they will have to pay tens or hundreds of years of hard work. What's more, it could even be their life. No cultivator will lower their guard. Perhaps this is what Senior doesn't understand. When the old woman heard this, she smiled even more. Taoist Master Xiao, you're not that old, right? Xiao Hua's face reddened slightly. I am already 20 years old, but my cultivation is still shallow. Just based on Taoist Xiao's generosity in giving me an immortal pill, even if my cultivation is low now, I'm sure I'll be able to reach the great Tao in the future. Old Zhu praised. Thank you for your kind words. Xiao Hua cupped his hands and took out 2 top-grade parasol pills from his storage pouch. He handed them over and said, although I don't know why this pill can cure Elder's chronic illness, but since Ah Jen's wife and daughter also need this pill, and I have received their thanks, Elder, please accept these 2 pills. The old woman looked at the sycamore pill in Xiao Hua's hand, her eyes filled with joy. Her lips trembled slightly as she stretched out her hand, seemingly hesitating. Elder, there's no harm in accepting it. The significance of this pill is far greater than its medicinal effect. Since it can save 2 lives, I am still willing to take it out. Xiao Hua handed over the pills to the old woman. Taoist Master Xiao is so righteous, this old woman really admires you. This matter concerns my Zhu family's descendants, this old woman doesn't dare to be unreasonable. Thank you, Taoist Master Xiao. The old woman sighed and held the parasol pill in her hand trembling. Xiao Hua sighed in his heart, but at the same time, he also felt a burst of comfort in his heart. It was the kind of comfort of accumulating merit. Ah Jen, since Taoist Master Xiao is giving the pill, you take Xiao Feng and and let them take the pill first. This old woman will accompany Taoist Master Xiao here. The old woman raised her hand and handed the parasol pill to Fan Riguan. Mother, it's already late, Taoist Master Xiao wants to stay in our house. The place hasn't been cleaned yet, how can you take the pill in such a hurry? Moreover, there's still 20 to 30 years before the disease flares up, there's no need to rush. Fan Riguan was somewhat embarrassed. That's right, Taoist Master Xiao, please don't blame me. This stubborn disease has been troubling my Zhu family for who knows how many generations. This old woman suddenly found a way and lost her sense of propriety. The old woman said apologetically, then waved her hand and said, Feng, quickly take out the immortal fruits in the house and let Taoist Master Shao taste them. Yes, mother. The middle-aged woman hurriedly responded and went to the central room. Fan Riguan said in a low voice, Mother, aren't you going to invite Taoist Master Shao into the house? Xiaohua waved his hand and said, Let's do it under this parasol tree, I feel a little familiar here. Alright, Jen, quickly bring out the table and chairs. Not long after, a square table and 2 chairs were moved under the parasol tree. A plate of strange fruits was also placed on the table. Taoist Master Shao, this is a special product of my Jingfan Qi. The immortals of Jingbua City often come to pick it. This old woman specially asked Feng, to buy some for Taoist Master Shao to taste. Thank you for your kindness. Xiaohua smiled and picked up a jujube-like spirit fruit and threw it into his mouth. The spirit fruit didn't have any spirit energy, but it tasted very good and was extremely refreshing. After casually eating too, Xiaohua saw Zhu Shi, drooling and licking her lips. He smiled and pushed the rest to the side of the table and said, Little guy, I will treat you to some spirit fruits. Immortal Elder is so unreasonable, this is what Grandma bought with the immortal stones at home to treat you to. It is originally my family's food, how can you treat me to it? Zhu Shi, saw that Xiaohua was like a big brother next to her, far from the seriousness of an immortal elder, so she was a little scared. Shut up. The old woman scolded and then smiled apologetically, could it be that Taoist Master Shao doesn't like these immortal fruits? This old woman will send Jen to buy some more. No need, old woman, these spirit fruits I like very much, but I will just eat a little, no need to trouble you anymore. Xiaohua quickly waved his hand and said, It's better to let Jen's wife and take the elixir earlier, so that you can be at ease. After pondering for a moment, the old woman said, All right, let them go in and take the elixir, this old woman will accompany the immortal elder to explain the whole story. And, that's how it should be. Xiaohua clapped his hands and said. Then, Xiaohua's heart moved, and a strange idea appeared in his mind. He stretched out his hand and said, come here, let I see what's wrong with you. You have. Zhu Shi's little face was red, but she didn't say the last word. Go, listen to Taoist Master Shao. The old woman scolded. Zhu Shi felt very wronged, but she didn't dare to refute. She slowly moved over. Xiaohua smiled and handed a slender spirit fruit to her, and said with a smile, You can eat this spirit fruit, just stretch out your right hand. Zhu Shi was only a 5-year-old child. She took the spirit fruit in one hand and threw away her unhappiness. She happily stretched out her lotus root-like right arm. Xiaohua smiled and stretched out his right hand's index finger and middle finger, and put it on Zhu Shi's wrist where her pulse was. He closed his eyes, as if he was thinking. The old woman stared at Xiaohua's face, paying attention to the changes in his expression. Sure enough, Xiaohua's face was as heavy as water, then slightly frowned, and after half a cup of tea, it became gloomy again. Seeing this, the old woman was not surprised, but happy, and her eyes lit up. When Xiaohua took his hand away from Zhu Shi's arm, the old woman asked, Taoist Master Shao. Did you notice anything? Please stretch out your right arm. Xiaohua said with a smile. The old woman did as she was told, and Xiaohua did the same as before, but his expression was the opposite, he didn't frown. Okay, Jen, you take your wife and your daughter to the room to take the elixir. Xiaohua withdrew his hand and said, If the elixir works, this Shu family's chronic illness can be cured. Fan Riguan's face was full of surprise, and he cupped his hands and said, Then. I was rude. Go, the earlier you take the elixir, the earlier you can feel at ease. Xiaohua didn't mind, and Zhu Feng, who was standing behind Fan Riguan, also bowed and followed Fan Riguan into the room with Zhu Shi. Taoist Master Xiao, please bring in some more spirit fruit and listen to this old woman. The old woman pushed the spirit fruit over again, and said with a smile, I wonder if Taoist Master Xiao knows about talismans. Talismans? Xiao Hua frowned, shook his head and said, Cultivation is shallow, I don't know about talismans. It's not that Taoist Master Xiao's cultivation is shallow, this talisman has been lost in the Xiaoyu continent for a long time. If it wasn't for my Zhu family suffering from this insidious talisman, how could this old woman know? Old woman. Xiao Hua listened to the old woman of the Zhu family talk, and it was simply more than what he knew. He couldn't help but feel deep veneration. The old woman of the Zhu family seemed to know what Xiao Hua was thinking. She took out a very thick book from her bosom, handed it over, and said with a smile, This is my Zhu family's most precious heirloom. It records the deeds of my Zhu family's ancestors, some matters of the Xiaoyu continent, the misfortune of my Zhu family suffering from the talisman, and some of my many years of experience in breaking the talisman. Xiao Hua took it, and casually flipped through it. This was a book made of silk of an unknown material, and there were a lot of small words written inside. Xiao Hua didn't look at it carefully, and handed it over again, and said with a smile, Since it's the Zhu family's heirloom, I won't look at it anymore. He, Taoist Master Xiao is really a gentleman. The old woman smiled, but didn't take it, and continued, This isn't the most important thing. The most important thing about this book is that it was left behind by the ancestors of the Zhu family. My Zhu family was also a cultivator of the Xiaoyu continent several thousand years ago. This book hides a great secret. A great secret? Xiao Hua stared blankly, and again looked at the unremarkable book in his hand. This secret is related to cultivation. My Zhu family has long stopped being cultivators, so it's useless to take this book. Since Taoist Xiao helped my Zhu family get rid of the pain of the talisman, this book is my gift of thanks. I hope that Taoist Xiao will be able to comprehend the secret in this book soon, and achieve a great divine ability. Ah. So it's like this. Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. It wasn't that he didn't think about the Zhu family's reward, but he definitely didn't think that they would give him a book. This book had been in the Zhu family's possession for several thousand years, and no one had been able to comprehend the great secret. He didn't think that he would have more luck than others. Chapter 13-15. Sitting under the parasol tree and looking at the thin twilight, Xiao Hua frowned slightly as he listened to the old woman of the Zhu clan slowly talk about the Zhu clan's matters. It turns out that this Zhu clan existed several thousand years ago. And, perhaps even longer. Anyway, the old woman of the Zhu clan wasn't too clear. At that time, the Zhu clan was also a famous cultivation clan on the Xiaoyu continent. But now, they only had a single descendant. Moreover, this descendant was only barely passed down. The fundamental reason for this was a charm that Xiao Hua had never heard of before. The so-called talisman curse was not the same as the Chinese talisman curse. It was a kind of great magical power. It was cast by a person with great magical power to cast a spell that was similar to a curse on a person. This spell would take root in the person's body and cause a huge impact on the person's body and meridians, thus affecting the person's life. However, this was not the scariest thing about the talisman curse. The scariest thing about the talisman curse was that it could be passed down from generation to generation. Before the talisman curse was broken, all of the person's children and grandchildren would have this talisman curse in their bodies. And this kind of charm is also used on the person's children and grandchildren. The charm is a divine ability that Xiao Hua has never heard of. Although the old woman of the Zhu clan was deeply harmed by it, she also can't explain it clearly. As for what kind of cultivation clan the Zhu clan used to be, how it flourished, how it declined, why a person with great divine ability cast the charm on it, and what this charm is specifically, the old woman of the Zhu clan isn't very clear. Perhaps it's because the truth has been annihilated in history, or perhaps it's because the Zhou clan's ancestors intentionally covered it up. Everything has become a story after several thousand years. Taoist Master Shao, this charm is very insidious. My Zhou clan's descendants, regardless of whether they're male or female, will be implanted with this charm. This charm will only appear between the age of 40 and 50. First, a part of the body will feel pain, then this pain will slowly spread throughout the entire body. Along with the pain, their strength will also gradually decrease. In the end, they will lie on the bed and only have the strength to wail and die from the pain. The old woman of the Zhou clan's eyes showed fear. This old woman once saw father wail in pain for several days with my own eyes. In the end, he had no choice but to take poison and commit suicide. Alas, this old woman's father said that taking poison and committing suicide is the fate of my Zhou clan. This old woman has also prepared this item for herself. Alas, in order to continue the bloodline of the Zhou clan, if our Zhou clan has a male descendant, we naturally don't have to worry about it. If we have a female descendant, we will have to recruit a son-in-law. After marrying into the family, both the male and female descendants will have to take the Zhou clan's surname. Ah Zhen is the son-in-law that my daughter, Feng Er, found when she was young. I originally didn't want to tell him about this, but Ah Zhen is very filial. When the curse on my body activated, he became very anxious and did everything he could to find a doctor to cure me. He even used his job at the inn to ask the immortals for pills. Actually, I already knew that if the immortal elders could break the curse with their immortal pills, they would have broken it thousands of years ago. Why would they wait until now? Last night, when he brought back Taoist Xiao's immortal pills, the old woman didn't believe it. However, even if she didn't have the slightest confidence, she still wouldn't take it herself. After all, if Qi Er took it, she wouldn't have to suffer from the curse anymore. Alas, although Qi Er didn't know about the curse, she was born filial. Unexpectedly, she wanted to give it to her mother. How could Feng Er have the heart to let the old woman take the poison and die? She even wanted to give it to the old woman. It was really difficult. This is because the heavens have the virtue of cherishing all living things, and it benefits good people the most. If it weren't for the fact that the Zhou clan's people are all filial people, how would they know that this medicinal pill can break the sinister curse? Xiaohua said with a smile, good people will be rewarded, that's exactly what I meant. Taoist Xiao is right. Don't say that the will of the heavens is unpredictable, justice is in the hearts of people. The old woman also said with a smile, if it weren't for Taoist Xiao's immortal pills, we wouldn't have been able to break the curse for thousands of years. Moreover, Taoist Xiao wouldn't have been able to touch our general if we give up the immortal pills. Our Zhou clan's book wouldn't have been able to find a fated person like Taoist Xiao. Boom! Just when Xiaohua heard the old woman's words, the space in his mind shook violently. A faint trace appeared under the starry sky. As for what it was, he couldn't see it clearly. Xiaohua felt the movement in his space. He immediately put his mind into the space and carefully looked at the trace. After a while, he came out of the space. Taoist Xiao, do you think the old woman's words are correct? The old woman said with a smile, this is the so-called karma, the so-called fate. Taoist Xiao shouldn't refuse this book. Karma? Xiaohua's furrowed brows immediately relaxed. He understood and said with a smile, what the old woman said is right. I shouldn't refuse. As he spoke, he waved his hand and put the book into his storage bag. Seeing Xiaohua put away the book, the old woman smiled, Taoist Xiao, you've given my Zhou clan a new lease on life. My Zhou clan can't repay you and can only give this thing to Taoist Xiao. As for whether or not Taoist Xiao can comprehend this secret, it will depend on Taoist Xiao. I know. Xiaohua said with a smile, if I can comprehend it, then I'll go to the Zhou clan to form good karma. Really? The old woman was shocked. She stood up and saluted, then this old woman, really doesn't know how to thank Taoist Xiao. Alas, who knows when that will happen. I's only speaking with a red mouth and white teeth right now. Taoist Xiao, as long as you have the heart, maybe there really will be such a day. The old woman sat down. Then, she hesitated and asked, I have something to say, but I don't know if it's appropriate. Xiaohua smiled bitterly in his heart and nodded, please speak. Taoist Xiao, when you pressed your fingers on Qi, and the old woman's wrists, was that a medical method? That. Xiaohua said, I don't know the origin of that technique, but it seems to be a medical method. I felt something very strange in Qi-er's meridians, but I can't tell what it is. I only felt that it was very cold, but I didn't feel it in the old woman's body. Presumably, it has something to do with the talisman that you talked about. Taoist Xiao, you are indeed a deity. The old woman praised, my Zhu clan's ancestors used countless methods, but there was no record of this in the book. I'm lucky, Xiaohua smiled. Actually, he didn't know what technique he used just now, but he had a sudden realization. At this time, suddenly, a miserable scream came from the central room. The old woman was shocked and shouted, Feng. Xiaohua was also shocked. He immediately stood up. He didn't use any magic power, but he used some kind of mysterious footwork and quickly ran towards the central room like a ghost. Xiaohua rushed into the central room, then he realized, I didn't use any magic power, how can I run so fast? However, everything in front of him didn't allow him to think anymore. He saw that on one side of the central room, behind a screen, there was a big bed. At this time, Fan Riguan's wife and daughter were lying on it. Fan Riguan's wife, Zhu Feng, was screaming. Zhu Feng was bleeding from her 7 orifices, and her face was pale. Her 2 hands were grabbing the air, and her fingers were pale, as if she was in extreme pain. Mother! At this time, Zhu was also screaming. She was bleeding from her 7 orifices, and her face gradually became distorted. It seemed that she was also in pain. Fan Riguan sat in front of the bed and pressed his wife with his hands. He anxiously shouted, Feng, but Zhu Feng's strength was so great that she almost pushed him to the side. At this time, seeing Zhu screaming, Fan Riguan didn't know what to do. You go and hold Qi, Xiaohua's voice sounded in Fan Riguan's ears. Fan Riguan immediately calmed down, let go of Zhu Feng, and rushed to Zhu Without Fan Riguan holding her down, Zhu Feng's body twisted rapidly, as if she was going to jump up. At this time, Xiaohua stretched out his hand and pressed on Zhu Feng's shoulder. With a little force, a huge force pressed Zhu Feng to the bed. Zhu Feng could only struggle with all her strength, but she couldn't leave the bed. Then, Xiaohua stretched out his right hand like lightning and held Zhu Feng's right hand in his mouth, and pressed 2 fingers on her wrist. When Zhu Shi's old woman walked in, Xiaohua was thinking with his eyes closed. Zhu Feng was still struggling on the bed in pain. Zhu was also in pain. Under Fan Riguan's hands, she was also struggling with all her strength. What's going on? Zhu Shi's old woman also panicked. When she took the pill, she didn't feel this pain. Could it be? A trace of ominous feeling rose in the old woman's heart. After all, if he didn't have the confidence to break the charm, it could be fatal. Walking to Xiaohua's side, the old woman didn't dare to make a sound. She held the table beside her and nervously looked at Xiaohua's face. After a cup of tea's time, Xiaohua opened his eyes with a smile on his face and said, Congratulations, the charm in your daughter's body is gradually decreasing. However, it seems that because the charm was broken, it caused a backlash. The pain caused by the charm was triggered in advance. Really, thank you, Taoist Xiao. The old woman was almost crying with joy. Alas, if only there was a soul-cleansing charm, it could reduce your daughter's pain. Unfortunately, I only have a high-grade yellow charm. Xiaohua said regretfully. But at this time, his heart was moved again. He stretched out his hand and urged the magic power in his body. Pa pa pa, he pressed a few acupoints on Zhu Feng's body. Zhu Feng actually calmed down and stopped struggling. This is also possible. Xiao Hua was surprised, but he couldn't care less. He got up and pressed a few acupoints on Zhu Shi'er's body, making her quietly lie down on the bed. Taoist Xiao. Fan Riguan stood up at this time, sweating profusely, and looked at Xiao Hua very anxiously. Hee, how could it be easy to break the charm? The charm in your wife and your daughter's body is intact. Breaking it alive will definitely cause pain. Because the charm was triggered long ago, old madam has already experienced pain. It should be relatively easy to break it. Xiao Hua thought for a while and said. Then what about now? Taoist Xiao. Zhu Shi's old woman asked. I cast a spell to restrain the two of them. For the time being, they can't struggle. But this pain still has to be experienced. After enduring this period, it should be fine. Chapter 13-16. Sure enough, as Xiao Hua said, after 2 meals, the pain on Zhu Feng and Zhu Shi'er's faces gradually lessened until they finally calmed down. The sweat on their foreheads and bodies had already soaked their black hair and clothes. Seeing this, Xiao Hua looked at their situation again and turned to Fan Riguan and the old woman. He cupped his hands and said, Fortunately, I didn't disappoint you. As he spoke, he casually tapped the acupoints on their bodies a few times. Only then could they move their bodies again. Feng, Fan Riguan and the old woman's faces were filled with joy as they rushed to the bed. Xiao Hua looked at them with a smile and walked out of the room. At this time, the curtain of night had already fallen. The clear night sky was dotted with stars. Xiao Hua stood with his hands behind his back under the parasol tree and looked at the boundless starry sky through the leaves of the parasol tree. Countless stars twinkled slightly, like pairs of cunning eyes. Occasionally, meteors streaked across the night sky, disrupting the order of the night sky. Xiao Hua looked while thinking about what just happened. What was that footwork? Although I can't remember, I actually know how to use it. It seems that I'm very familiar with it. What is the technique to tap the acupoints? It actually has the effect of the soul cleansing talisman. It seems, there are many other techniques with different effects. Can it be used on cultivators? Xiao Hua immediately thought of the use of the acupoint tapping technique. But after thinking for a while, he unconsciously shook his head. Cultivators have defensive magic power all over their bodies. Many people also have defensive magic tools. Even if this technique hits the acupoints, what's the use? It can only be effective on people like Zhu Shi'er. Taoist Xiao. Just as Xiao Hua was thinking, Fan Riguan walked over and bowed. Thank you for coming personally, otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. Xiao Hua smiled and nodded. I received benefits from your Zhu family, naturally I have to do my best. Alas, I only found out yesterday that my mother's family actually had such hardships. It's a pity that I always felt miserable about my background. Compared to now, it really doesn't count as anything. In the future, you should show more filial piety to the elderly, husband and wife should treat each other with respect, that's all. Xiao Hua said with a smile, as if he was an experienced person. Oh, it's getting late. My wife and my daughter are too tired and have already fallen asleep. I can't thank Shinren Xiao. Please come with me. Your room has already been tidied up. Let them come over tomorrow morning to thank you. After saying that, Fan Riguan led Xiao Hua to a room. The room was already very clean, and a plate of spirit fruits was placed on the table. The house is really simple and crude. This place is decorated according to the Flying Fish Inn. I wonder if Taoist Xiao is satisfied with it. Fan Riguan said embarrassedly. It's alright. go take care of your mother and the others. Xiaohua waved his hand and walked to the side of the table. There was a praying mat there. Xiaohua sat cross-legged and picked up a spirit fruit and threw it into his mouth. After Fan Riguan withdrew, Xiaohua looked around the room. The room wasn't big, but it was tidied up very delicately. It was much cleaner than his room at the Flying Fish Inn. A small piece of Minghua stone was placed on the table, illuminating the entire room. In the corner of the room, there were some uncommon ornaments, looking rather elegant. Xiaohua looked around. He knew that Fan Riguan had spent a lot of effort. He nodded in his heart. Immediately, he patted his storage pouch and took out the book gifted by the old woman from the Zhu family. This book was the same size as an ordinary book. The cover was the same as the pages of the book. They were both made of an unknown silk material, and the words recorded on the pages were also clearly written with a special ink. Xiaohua didn't look at the words first. He only roughly skimmed through the book. However, he didn't have much hope. The book had been in the Zhu family for several thousand years, and no one had discovered its secret. It was absolutely impossible for him to see any clues just from the outside. Sure enough, Xiaohua didn't see any abnormalities. He had no choice but to open the book and carefully read it. But after reading for a while, he frowned. What was written in this book? Apart from the description of the Zhu family's bitter history, there were also complaints about some cultivators. These complaints were extremely obscure and unclear. Most of the other words were about how to break the Zhu family's talismans. There were also all kinds of strange methods to break the talismans. Some started from the yellow talismans, some started from the magic arts, and some even started from the medicinal pills. However, when Xiaohua crudely flipped to the end, all of these methods, without exception, failed. And every failure was a fresh human life. Xiaohua sighed and closed the book. He didn't have much understanding of this talisman. He had only heard the old woman's narration just now. In addition, he had used some inexplicable method to detect the insidious poison in Zhu Feng and Zhu Shi'er's bodies. As for the specifics, how could he know? As for why the top-grade Wu Yao pill in his space could break the talisman, Xiaohua was even more confused. He himself didn't sense anything different about the Wu Yao pill. The unknown thing that Xiao Yueheng, Zhang Qingxiao, and the others spoke of. He didn't know where it came from, and what use this unknown thing had. It was even harder to say. Just wait until you step on dog shit in the future. Xiaohua suddenly thought of Zhang Qingxiao's catchphrase. He tossed the book in his hand a few times in the air and put it into the space behind his head. Xiaohua sat cross-legged without moving. After putting the book away, his mind returned to the space. He sensed under the starry sky, the faint traces that had appeared because of the old woman's karma. What is this thing? It seems to be a technique. It seems to be a hand. At this moment, Xiaohua's mind seemed to be a point, but it also seemed to be the entire space. However, this space didn't match with the starry sky. The starry sky seemed to be within the space, but it also seemed to have no connection with the starry sky. It was another mysterious place. Xiaohua's mind flashed past the traces that had just appeared. Suddenly, his mind stirred, and a feeling of comprehending a technique suddenly arose. This thing can be comprehended. Xiaohua was pleasantly surprised. He opened up his mind, wanting to completely cover the traces. Unfortunately, the traces only appeared a moment ago. Xiaohua's mind couldn't sense anything specific. This doesn't seem to work. Xiaohua was rather disappointed. But at this moment, perhaps it was a stroke of luck, or perhaps it was a kind of habit, Xiaohua's mind suddenly looked at the endless starry sky above the space. That slow, unceasing, and incomparably mysterious starry sky trajectory. The traces just now haven't completely appeared, so I can't comprehend them. However, this starry sky has already taken shape and is incomparably clear. Countless stars are moving according to different mysterious trajectories. Can I comprehend this starry sky? Xiaohua thought. Without the slightest hesitation, he enlarged his mind infinitely and directly welcomed the starry sky above the space. His mind was also mysterious. The starry sky didn't have an end, and his mind also seemed to have no end. He didn't know how much time had passed, and he also didn't know how big the starry sky was. Xiaohua only knew that at a certain moment, his mind really did come into contact with the seemingly ethereal starry sky. An indescribable feeling came from his mind. This feeling was even more subtle than when Xiaohua comprehended a technique, even more subtle. It seemed as if everything in the starry sky was gradually being reflected in his mind, and his mind also gradually fused with the starry sky, a kind of mysterious and wonderful realm. Heaven-reaching realm. Xiaohua was startled. Oh, that's not right. This is heaven-reaching, not heaven-reaching realm. Just as Xiaohua was startled, his mind separated from the starry sky and fell back into the space. What kind of technique is this? Or is it some kind of magical ability? Xiaohua was very surprised, somewhat unable to understand. However, when he opened his eyes, he was once again greatly shocked. Outside the window, it was already dyed white, the sky was already bright. Alas, I only let my mind come into contact with the starry sky and immediately spent so much time. If I really comprehended it, I can't say comprehended it, it should be comprehended it. How much time would it take? Xiaohua smiled bitterly. This comprehension. I don't know what use it has. My magic power has increased again. Xiaohua smiled bitterly and checked his cultivation. He couldn't help but be dumbfounded. How come compared to normal cultivation, it's equivalent to 3 days of bitter cultivation? Could it be that this is a kind of fast cultivation method? Xiaohua was pleasantly surprised. That's right, how could a qi condensation brat like him know about comprehending the heavenly Tao? Even nascent soul stage cultivators could directly use their nascent soul to communicate with heaven and earth. Even severed soul stage cultivators could turn their nascent soul into their own avatar and use the spiritual energy of heaven and earth as their own food. They couldn't pry into the heavenly Tao. Only during tribulation transcendence, the heavenly Tao contained in the lightning tribulation could give transcending tribulation stage cultivators a trace of enlightenment and open a tiny door to the heavenly Tao, allowing them to have a clear direction in their cultivation. As for the specific heavenly Tao, the entire world was under the heavenly Tao. Since they could see a trace of the heavenly Tao, it was possible for Mahayana stage cultivators to comprehend the heavenly Tao under the heavenly Tao and use the heavenly Tao to open a door to ascension. Ascension to the immortal world. As for what the heavenly Tao was, every Mahayana stage cultivator's knowledge and comprehension was different. What they needed to do was to use the superficial understanding of the heavenly Tao to ascend. As for the specific comprehension of the heavenly Tao, there were no cultivation methods recorded, or perhaps it could be said that the heavenly Tao was the domain of immortals' cultivation. The difference between his cultivation and Xiaohua's was not just a little bit. How could Xiaohua understand it? As for why there were heavenly Tao laws in Xiaohua's space, Xiaohua, with his identity as a second-level qi condensation stage cultivator, actually had the opportunity to use his own mind to comprehend the heavenly Tao. That was not something that could be explained clearly now. What Xiaohua knew was that he could use 1 day as 3 days for this kind of cultivation method. Just this reason alone was enough. Chapter 13-17. Xiaohua didn't know that comprehending the Tao of heaven was a supreme cultivation method. He only thought that it was a shortcut to speed up his cultivation and let him use 1 day as 3 days. He was in a very good mood. Previously, he thought that if others cultivated for 1 year, he would need to cultivate for 12 years. Now, he should be able to reduce it to 4 years. Alas, if others cultivated for 1 year, it would be equivalent to 4 years of your cultivation. If it was an ordinary person, they would have already been dispirited. But for Xiaohua, it was a kind of surprise. It was like seeing a ray of light in the dark night. Happily, Xiaohua got up from the ground, stretched his body, and walked towards the door. Not waiting for him to open the door, he heard a clear and melodious voice outside, "Niangqin, this little immortal, when will he get up? Why did he wake up later than she? What a lazy bug. Shut up." Fan Riguan's voice was also low, as if he was trying to lower his voice. Quiet, don't disturb Master Zhao's cultivation. Immortal doesn't sleep. Obviously he's lazing in bed. Zhu Shi, still emphasized. It seemed that Xiaohua didn't change her impression of him because he broke the spell on her body yesterday and changed her fate. Xiaohua smiled and pushed the door open. His strong eyes shone directly on his face. Of course, it was already close to noon. No wonder Zhu Shi complained. Seeing Xiaohua come out of the room, Zhu's old woman trembled and stepped forward. With the help of Zhu Feng, she bowed and greeted, "Immortal Xiao, good morning." Xiaohua squinted his eyes and looked at the sun. He smiled bitterly and returned the greeting. "It seems that it's already late." "Yes, mother and grandmother were here early in the morning." Zhu Shi, said first. Zhu's old woman was angry and scolded, "Who asked you to talk? It's all so strange. Usually, a 4 or 5-year-old child would hold their mother's hand and hide behind her mother to look at strangers. But this Zhu Shi, is very precocious. Since she saw Xiaohua yesterday, she has been acting like a 10-year-old child." Xiaohua shook his head slightly and said to Zhu Feng, "Sister-in-law, after the pain last night, how do you feel today?" Zhu Feng's face was full of panic. She supported her mother and said anxiously, "Immortal Xiao, please don't call me like that. Just calling her Madame Zhu is enough." Xiaohua smiles but doesn't say anything. Zhu Feng thinks for a while then says somewhat embarrassedly, "I'll let Daoist Xiao know. Last night, after taking Daoist Zhao's immortal pill, I felt extremely comfortable at first. Then, my whole body was in pain and I couldn't keep my mind clear. Later on, I don't remember anything. When I entered the city, I heard from Qi-er's father that it was Spiritual Master Xiao who helped us last night. Once again, I would like to thank Spiritual Master Xiao for his kindness." With that, Zhu Feng let go of her mother's arm and pulled Zhu Shi, to kneel again. Xiaohua hurriedly supported her and said, "It's just a small matter, you don't have to do this." After that, Xiaohua still put his fingers on Zhu Feng and Zhu Shi's wrists. After looking at them for a while, he said to Fan Riguan, "From what I see, your wife and daughter are in the same situation as old madam. As for whether the so-called spell has been broken, I don't know." Fan Riguan glanced at his mother and said to Xiaohua with a smile, "Mother has already discussed with this little one. Spiritual Master Zhao's immortal pill should be the most effective in breaking the spell in the Zhu family for thousands of years. It's not much different from what the ancestors of the Zhu family guessed. If there is no accident, this insidious spell should have been broken. As for whether it has really been broken or not, only when my wife reaches 50 years old will we know. No matter what, Spiritual Master Xiao is the great benefactor of my Zhu family. My Zhu family will definitely make a longevity tablet for Spiritual Master Xiao and worship him sooner or later." The old woman of the Zhu family says very gratefully. Xiaohua doesn't know what a longevity tablet is and only thinks that she is being polite. He smiles and waves his hand. "Elder has already given I a reward. There's no need to do this kind of thing." Soon after, Xiaohua asked for the exact time and bade farewell to the old woman and her family. Under Fan Riguan's lead, they left the town and returned to the lakeside. Just as Fan Riguan had said, they arrived at the lakeside and before the great formation that blocked the secular world. Fan Riguan carefully took out a crude yellow talisman from his bosom and stuck it on the surface. The yellow talisman immediately began to burn. However, the light screen did not change at all because the yellow talisman had turned to ash. Just as Xiaohua was frowning, a figure rushed along the light screen and stopped at the place where the yellow talisman was burning. This person was rather young. He looked at Fan Riguan and asked, "Is this your immortal talisman?" "Yes, it is this little one. This little one is the waiter of the Flying Fish Inn. I'm returning to the Flying Fish Inn today." Fan Riguan says very respectfully with a salute. N. The young man waves his hand and the light screen dimmed. He says, "Go on." After Fan Riguan passes, the young man doesn't seem to care about Xiaohua. His figure flashes and disappears. When Xiaohua saw that the other party was ignoring him, he didn't even need to use the words he had prepared. He shrugged slightly and walked through the light shield. The light shield was also strange. When Xiaohua walked through it, it actually stirred up the Fa Li in Xiaohua's body. When the light shield sensed the Fa Li, it immediately stopped moving. Just like when he came, Xiaohua used a mid-grade spirit stone to start the shuttle again. However, when he returns this time, it is very calm and didn't encounter any storms. After getting off the shuttle, Fan Riguan still wants to invite Xiaohua to the Flying Fish Inn, but Xiaohua shakes his head and says, "Ah Jen, I's cultivation is shallow. You probably don't know. The matter of the pills is what I told you before. Don't say a word more. Otherwise, not only you, even I will be killed. If you think about your wife and daughter, you should know what to do. Don't worry, Taoist Xiao. This little one's mother has already warned me countless times. This little one naturally knows what to do." Fan Riguan says respectfully. "That's good. I am a loose cultivator. Others can't find I's trace. You should take care of your own safety." Xiaohua smiles and turns around to leave. Plop, Fan Riguan kneels on the ground and yells, "Taoist Xiao. Although this little one is a mortal of the secular world, I also know how to be grateful. Taoist Xiao's grace to this little one's family, this little one will never forget. I only hate this little one's weak strength. I hope that in the future, this little one will have the opportunity to repay Taoist Xiao's kindness. We'll meet again if fate wills it." Xiaohua lets out a long laugh and walks away. His shadow is extremely long under the sunlight. Fan Riguan kneels on the ground, his eyes are filled with gratitude and reverence. Xiaohua has a smile on his face. He doesn't turn his head and doesn't distinguish the direction. He just casually walks forward. Although Fan Riguan's family is the descendant of a cultivator family, they have already declined. It's already not easy for them to live the life of an ordinary person. Xiaohua absolutely doesn't think that they can repay him in any way. Of course, Xiaohua doesn't have too much time to think about this so-called scroll that contains a great secret. Because right now, he has to face the problem of how to be a good loose cultivator, how to be a qualified loose cultivator, how to survive in this world of cultivators. Of course, he still enjoys the gratitude of Fan Riguan's family. He likes the feeling of being thanked. After the time it takes to smoke a cigarette, Xiaohua casually finds an inn on the side of the road. It can be considered as another place to stay. This inn's facade is quite big. It's obviously higher class than the Flying Fish Inn. Of course, the inn's price is also not cheap. It costs 20 low-grade spirit stones per night. Naturally, Xiaohua doesn't agree. After bargaining for a while, Xiaohua spares them 3 spirit stones. Xiaohua takes out 17 low-grade spirit stones and gets a room. Similarly, a waiter escorted Xiaohua to his room before respectfully withdrawing. Needless to say, the room is quite big. Xiaohua even feels that the spiritual qi of heaven and earth here is a bit more than the Flying Fish Inn. After he activates the restriction of the room, he sits down cross-legged. He touches his ear and takes out the 100 high-grade talisman papers that the refining charm school gave him. He takes a closer look. Sure enough, the talisman papers are very different from the low-grade talisman papers from before. Not only does it feel to the touch, but the fine runes on the talisman papers are smooth and natural. Because Xiaohua's talisman ink has been used up, if he wants to refine yellow talismans, he will have to buy them from outside. Therefore, Xiaohua thinks for a while and puts the talisman papers into the space. He sits down cross-legged with his palms facing the sky. On one hand, he silently circulates the Death Flower Heart Sutra. On the other hand, he immerses his mind into the space. Just like last night at Jing Fanqi, his mind is infinitely enlarged. Time slowly passed, and when night fell, the reverse light within Xiaohua's mind space still stopped. A mysterious fluctuation spread out in all directions with Xiaohua's body as the center. Moreover, because Xiaohua's mind was comprehending the heavenly Tao, this fluctuation contained a trace of the heavenly Tao's aura. In that endless night sky, there were many different kinds of starlight shining down, wrapping around Xiaohua. Even more starlight seeped into Xiaohua's skin, meridians, and bones. Xiaohua spends the whole night cultivating. He only gets up when the sun is high up in the sky. He checks his body with great satisfaction, takes off the yellow talisman and walks out of the room. He asks the waiter about the location of E.G. and then walks out of the inn. The location of E.G. is a bit off. It is located in the innermost part of the southwest corner of Jingbo City. Xiaohua walks for about an hour before he arrives. However, the road is very direct. Xiaohua is not worried that he can't find the way back to the inn. When Xiaohua leaves the inn, there are not many cultivators on the street. When he gets closer to E.G., the number of cultivators he sees increases. In particular, there are several qi condensation cultivators around Xiaohua. They are all walking in the direction of E.G. Xiaohua understands in his heart that not all of them are going to E.G. Sure enough, they are the same as Xiaohua. They walk in front of E.G. and stop. In front of Xiaohua is a very huge square. At a glance, it has a radius of thousands of feet. Although it is not noon yet, there are already many people gathered in the square. Xiaohua can't see the depths of the square, but in front of Xiaohua, there are many cultivators sitting cross-legged. In front of these cultivators, there are some things placed in front of them, just like the stalls in the secular world. Chapter 13:18. This E.G.'s plaza was next to the lake. When Xiaohua arrived, there were many shuttles coming over from the water. On the shuttles, there were cultivators wearing the same clothes. They must be from the same sect. Xiaohua carefully looked at everything in the plaza. After all, this was his first time coming to E.G., so he was quite excited. Of course, at the same time, he was also nervous. Because there were many things he didn't know, he was afraid of exposing himself. He looked at the cultivators who came from the same direction as him. Some swaggered, ignoring everything else and directly entered E.G. Some were like Xiaohua, standing slightly and looking around for a moment. They took out a cloak from their storage pouch and skillfully put it on, covering their faces. This is a good idea, why didn't I think of it? Xiaohua was slightly surprised. He knew that these people often came to E.G. Then, he thought, forget it, it's my first time coming here. I'll take a look first. If there's any talisman ink or something like that, I'll buy some with spirit stones. I won't think about the rest for now. After making up his mind, Xiaohua calmed down and walked towards the square. Before he could reach the edge of the square, he heard a voice shouting from the side of the square's entrance, Mimi, Mimi, cheap Mimi, only 10 high-grade spirit stones, 10 high-grade spirit stones? Why is it so cheap? When Xiaohua heard this, his eyes lit up. He quickened his pace and ran towards the source of the voice. Unfortunately, he was far from the only one who heard this. By the time he arrived, that stall was already surrounded by many cultivators. Xiao Hua was somewhat anxious, but all the cultivators in front of him had cultivation levels higher than his, so he didn't dare to carelessly squeeze in. You, how could you possibly be a mystic insect? A shrill voice rang out. It was a female cultivator about 25 or 26 years old who had squeezed to the front of the stall. She was currently draping an extremely beautiful camouflage over her shoulders. She asked in astonishment, "You're completely useless in the camouflage." Behind the stall was a young cultivator around the age of 17 or 18, about the same age as Xiao Hua. His appearance was extremely fair, and his eyes were rolling around randomly. He appeared to be exceptionally quick-witted. The young cultivator was all smiles as he said, "Fellow Taoist, this camouflage cloth isn't suitable for you. Think about it, if you wear this camouflage cloth of mine, wouldn't your appearance that outshines the moon and puts flowers to shame be covered by it?" When the female cultivator heard this, she couldn't help but blush. "Don't be so glib-tongued. Your mystique seems to only be able to cover your face. It can't even conceal your cultivation base. How can it be called a mystique? Not to mention 10 high-grade spirit stones, in I's opinion, even a single high-grade spirit stone is not worth it." An old cultivator next to the female cultivator frowned and scolded. "Fellow Taoist, it's obvious that you're an itinerant cultivator who's experienced a lot. You're truly worthy of I's admiration. To tell the truth, what fellow Taoist is talking about is a mystique. However, this mystique isn't the same. The 7 possibilities sex mystique can conceal everything from a cultivator and has many uses. However, not all mystiques in the world have the same function as the 7 possibilities sex mystique." The young cultivator didn't show the slightest bit of fear and said with a matter-of-fact tone, "Some mystiques can't conceal a cultivator's cultivation base and can only change it. Naturally, changing it to a higher level is impossible. In fact, fellow Taoists, think about it again. Even if we qi condensation cultivators were a genuine mystique, a golden core or nascent soul cultivator would still be able to see through our true appearance. Rather than that, if you were a genuine mystique and spend several tens or hundreds of top-grade spirit stones, wouldn't you only be able to deceive a foundation establishment cultivator? Fellow Taoists, think about it again. Are you willing to pay such a large price for a genuine 7 possibilities sex mystique? Nonsense. If I had that many spirit stones, I would have already gone to the city's north. Why would I still be wandering around here?" A burly cultivator sneered. "Fellow Taoist, looking at your cultivation base, going to the city's north is only a matter of time. There's no need to rush. Listen to I first." The young cultivator cupped his fists and said with a smile, "If fellow Taoist doesn't have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of upper-grade spirit stones, and only spends a few hundred upper-grade spirit stones to buy an ordinary bewildering pill, which can only lower fellow Taoist's cultivation base, then what can it be? Apart from qi condensation, isn't it still qi condensation? What's the difference between wearing a mystique or not?" Xiao Hua immediately understood the young cultivator's words. Indeed, the 7 possibilities sex mystique didn't have any meaning to Xiao Hua. Perhaps a foundation establishment cultivator would be able to see through his true appearance. What was the difference between it and a normal cloak? Ha ha ha, no wonder your mystique is so cheap. It's basically the same as a cloak. The burly cultivator laughed and sneered. "If what you said is true, then I only need to buy a cloak with a low-grade spirit stone and it'll cover my face. What's the use of your mystique to cover my face?" With that, the cultivator threw the bewildering insect in front of the young cultivator and left. Everyone laughed when they heard this and immediately dispersed. Only the female cultivator at the front still held the bewildering insect in her hand and hesitated. Fellow Taoist, you really have a discerning eye. Where are you going to find this kind of thing? If you don't want to regret it, then you should make a move now. The young cultivator hurriedly said. But the female cultivator pursed her lips and said, also have a cloak. I only see that your mystique looks pretty, whether or not it can cover my face, I don't care. Ah. At this time, Xiaohua had already arrived in front of them. Hearing this, he couldn't help but bitterly smile in his heart. He thought of the peacock fantasy that Xiao Xianrui bought at the market. Wasn't it because it was pretty? Alas, this female cultivator really isn't a male cultivator. Xiaohua sighed and secretly said in his heart. But soon after, he laughed even more hoarsely. These words aren't generally correct. Fellow Taoist, if you really like it, forget it. Today is the first time EG has opened, so I'll spare you 3 spirit stones. It's only 7 high-grade spirit stones. What do you think? The young cultivator's face was resolute, as if he was cutting off meat from his body. This. The female cultivator bit her lip. Her face was still filled with disappointment. She was just about to put the mystique in her hand on the ground. Forget it. Since fellow Taoist likes it so much, Alas, if it weren't for the strict order of my sect, what harm would there be in giving this mystique to fellow Taoist? As the ancient saying goes, treasured swords are given to heroes, red makeup goes with beauties. This mystique is exactly what fellow Taoist should wear. I'll give you 5 high-grade spirit stones. How about it? The young cultivator's face was slightly pale. It seemed that he really had reached his bottom line. Hee, that's what you said. The female cultivator chuckled. She quickly slapped her storage pouch and took out 5 high-grade spirit stones. She handed them over to the young cultivator, turned around, and left. Alas, the young cultivator sighed helplessly and shook his head. His eyes were filled with helplessness. In just a moment, the young cultivator raised his head. When he saw Xiaohua walk to the front of the stall, his expression immediately changed. He was full of smiles as he picked up the mystique in front of him and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist, I can tell at a glance that you're a person of great stature. A rogue cultivator like you is the easiest to target. If it weren't for that mystique covering your face, you wouldn't even be bothered by a female cultivator who wants to dual cultivate with you." This. When Xiaohua heard this, he smiled bitterly. He also wanted to take a look, so he unconsciously reached out to take it. Fellow Taoist's eyes are indeed sharp. You really know what's good for you. Just based on fellow Taoist's flattery, there's no need to say anything else. That fellow Taoist just now offered 7 spirit stones, so I will give fellow Taoist some benefits. Only 6 high-grade spirit stones. What do you think? Xiaohua held the so-called mystique in his hand and carefully examined it. This mystique was made from an unknown material and was very light. However, apart from some talisman characters on the hood, there was no difference from an ordinary Taoist robe. After thinking for a while, Xiaohua smiled and said, "I wonder, which sect fellow Taoist is from?" Fellow Taoist is noisy. If you want to buy it, then name a price. If it's suitable, I will give it to you. Why, try to curry favor with I. In any case, I am not a rogue cultivator and have no relationship with you. The young cultivator frowned and replied with extreme displeasure. His face was full of vigilance. Sigh, since fellow Taoist knows that I am a rogue cultivator, how can I afford 6 high-grade spirit stones? Xiaohua said with a smile. The young cultivator glanced at Xiaohua and said, "Actually, fellow Taoist, I'll say something unpleasant. With fellow Taoist's cultivation, I think you don't need to buy this mystique. Even if you cover your face, with such a low cultivation, you'll only make it more conspicuous. You might as well save up some spirit stones and buy a defensive Taoist robe. This is the right way." This. Xiaohua's face was slightly red. He pointed at the mystique at the side and said, "Actually, I will also tell you the truth. The style of this mystique is much better than a Taoist robe. I like it very much. You." The young cultivator's face was full of resentment. He picked up the mystique and threw it to Xiaohua. He sneered and said, "Since fellow Taoist is so vain, I will fulfill your wish. If someone else buys this mystique, it will cost at least 6 spirit stones. If fellow Taoist wants it, then take 5. Sigh, forget it, just take 3 high-grade spirit stones." Then, he muttered in a low voice, "I'm afraid, you can't even take out 3. Sure enough, Xiaohua muttered, "Fellow Taoist, don't tell me you really don't have 3 high-grade spirit stones." The young cultivator stared blankly and said angrily, "Fellow Taoist, 3 spirit stones is I's lowest price. I have worked hard for more than a month. You can't let I work hard for nothing." When Xiaohua heard this, he raised his eyebrows and somewhat understood. "Oh, these 3 spirit stones are the lowest price given by my sect. I see that fellow Taoist really wants it, and looking at your cultivation, you really can't take out the spirit stones of my sect. That's why I said it. I really can't reduce it anymore." The young cultivator hurriedly said. "High-grade spirit stones. I don't have them. I wonder what fellow Taoist is willing to exchange." Xiaohua said with a smile. "Sigh, if you don't have spirit stones, what good things can you have?" The young cultivator waved his hand and said with a sigh, "Forget it, looking at your cultivation. Sigh, I was also in dire straits like you in the past. I won't say anything to you. Take out all the spirit stones you have, and I will give this mystique to you." After the young cultivator finished speaking, he stared at Xiaohua. It was quite thought-provoking. How could Xiaohua take advantage of this? Although he didn't know why the young cultivator was staring at him, he only shook his head and said, "You just need to say what you want. If I have it, I will naturally take it out. If not, I will turn around and leave." The young cultivator nodded slightly and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist indeed, has some character. It's not out of I's expectations. Firm and straightforward people are easily broken. This shouldn't be the character of a loose cultivator." Soon after, he looked around and saw that there weren't any cultivators. He said with a smile, "You can take this mystique. Although this mystique is worth 3 high-grade spirit stones, it's still something I personally made. Giving it to you is nothing. You really want to give it to me?" Xiaohua was stunned. The young cultivator's attitude was completely different from before. He didn't understand the young cultivator's meaning. Take it. In the past, when I was your age, my cultivation wasn't high, and I suffered humiliation. Now that I see you, I think of myself in the past. This mystique is only worth 3 spirit stones in I's eyes. If it can be of greater use to you, even if I don't want these 3 spirit stones, I'll still be gratified in my heart." The young cultivator said sincerely. These words were somewhat familiar to Xiaohua's ears. Wasn't this what he said to Fan Riguan's family? A top-grade parasol pill only had healing and commemorative significance to him, but to Zhu Shi, and the others, it was a perfect life and a fresh life. Similarly, this mystique was worth 3 high-grade spirit stones to the young cultivator, but to him, a loose cultivator who was only at the 2nd layer of the qi refining realm, it might be a life. Although there is mutual deception in the cultivation world, although there is the law of the jungle, there are still people who sympathize with the weak and help the weak. Xiaohua sighed with emotion. Thus, Xiaohua said with a smile, "Many thanks, fellow Taoist. In fact, I don't have any spirit stones, but I do have some fireball talismans. I don't know if fellow Taoist needs them." Fireball talismans? The young cultivator didn't frown and immediately nodded. "And, that's fine. If fellow Taoist has the heart to give them, then give them to me at the price." "Okay," Xiaohua nodded and looked left and right. He clapped his hands and took out 4 fireball talismans, handing them over to the young cultivator. When the young cultivator saw the 4 fireball talismans, he said with a smile, I appreciate fellow Daoists' kindness, but these fireball talismans. High grade. When he took them in his hands and was about to decline, he suddenly recognized them and looked at Xiaohua in shock. He then looked around and put the fireball talismans into his storage pouch first, saying in a low voice, "Fellow Daoist, don't you need them to protect you? Even if you want to change them, it's better to change into some defensive Daoist robes." Xiaohua smiled but didn't say anything. "And, since it's like this, I'll accept them." The young cultivator didn't say much and said again, "I meet the requirements. How should I address fellow Daoist?" "I Xiaohua greets fellow Daoist Fu." Xiaohua cupped his hands and saluted. "He, fellow Daoist Xiao is too polite," Guing said with a smile. He still wanted to say something, but another person came over. Guing immediately called out loudly, "Fellow Daoist, quickly come over and take a look. Cheap and good bewitching Yong. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote for it." Chapter 13-19. Xiaohua laughed and turned to leave the stall. He shook the camouflage garment and was about to put it on when a voice came from behind him, "Humph, who would target you with this kind of cultivation? Even if they killed you, would they be able to take out top-grade spirit stones from your storage pouch?" Xiaohua stared blankly. This seems to be talking about me, right? Xiaohua was very puzzled. When he turned around and looked carefully, he couldn't help but be stunned. This person, he knew him. And, it couldn't be said that he knew him. A few days ago, when he entered Jingbua City, he saw him outside the city. It was Xuanyan School's 10-year-old disciple. That day, because Xiaohua looked at him too much, he was glared back. Now, he didn't even look at him, but he was actually despised by him. Xiaohua was somewhat angry, and he sneered, "I admit that my cultivation is shallow, but, can't I wear camouflage garment to cover my face? Besides, what does I wear camouflage garment or not have to do with you? What does it have to do with me?" The boy's face was rather arrogant, and he snorted coldly, "Humph, it's not your fault that your cultivation is shallow, but it's your fault that you come out and let people mock you. You." Xiaohua was furious. He raised his eyes and looked left and right, but he didn't see this boy's martial brothers, and he also didn't see the boy's 11th layer aura refining teacher. "What are you looking at? Looking for help? Humph, loose cultivators are loose cultivators. When they see someone alone, they want to attack. Truly, a dog can't change its habit of eating shit. I was just walking here and casually said a few words. I didn't say it was you, so why, are you looking for a scolding?" The boy was rather eloquent, and his words made Xiaohua stare blankly. Thinking carefully, he indeed didn't mention anything about camouflage garment, nor did he mention anything about Xiaohua. He really did, admit it himself. Xiaohua's face was very unsightly. He put on the camouflage garment, ignored the boy, and turned to leave. The boy's eyebrows rose, showing an expression completely different from an ordinary boy's, and he still unhurriedly walked inside Bazaar. Unlucky, unlucky. Xiaohua muttered to himself as he walked, this disciple of a large sect, how do they teach him? So what if he was a loose cultivator? There are good and bad rogue cultivators. The famous sects are all sanctimonious. I don't know about the others, but the 100 Herbs clan is definitely not a good thing. Just as Xiaohua was thinking, a stall appeared before his eyes. Two men around the 5th level of qi refining were coldly sitting behind the stall with their eyes closed and not speaking. The stall was filled with talisman brushes, talisman ink, talisman paper and other items. Upon seeing this, Xiaohua didn't continue to curse those famous schools and sects in his heart. He walked to the front of the stall, picked up the talisman paper and carefully examined it. The quality of the talisman paper was ordinary, slightly worse than the mid-grade talisman paper of the refining talisman school. Looking at the talisman ink and other items, they were also the same. Immediately after, Xiaohua said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist, how much are these items priced?" At this moment, Xiaohua's body was covered in a camouflage cloth, so the two cultivators couldn't see his true cultivation level. One of them opened his eyes, swept a glance at him, and stated the price. Hearing this, Xiaohua nodded his head. The price of this talisman paper was actually about the same as the low-grade talisman paper of the refining talisman school. It was indeed cheap. Xiaohua glanced at the surroundings and said in a low voice, "Fellow Taoist, may I ask if there's any high-grade talisman ink here?" High-grade talisman ink? That cultivator's expression didn't change, and he said with self-mockery, "Fellow Taoist, take a look at I's cultivation level, how can I craft high-grade talisman ink?" Xiaohua blushed with shame and said embarrassedly, "I was negligent, please don't blame me, fellow Taoist." The other person opened his eyes and said, "It's fine, we're rogue cultivators. These are all carefully crafted by ourselves. If fellow Taoist takes a fancy to it, feel free to choose. If there's nothing to your liking, please go to the side and take a look. This fellow Taoist's talisman ink, how much is it?" When Xiaohua heard that they were rogue cultivators, he felt a bit closer in his heart and asked. After hearing the other party's price, Xiaohua inwardly nodded and said with a smile, "I don't have any spirit stones, only some fireball talismans. Would fellow Taoists like to take a look?" When they heard it was fireball talismans, the two people's faces were filled with disappointment. They shook their heads and said, "I can craft low-grade yellow talismans like fireball talismans, so I don't lack them. If fellow Taoist has some Vajra talismans, strength talismans, or other rare yellow talismans for defense, then I can consider it." "So it's like that," Xiaohua muttered to himself for a moment, then said in a low voice, "I have some ordinary spirit herbs here, but they're relatively old. Would fellow Taoists be interested?" Old? The two people's eyes unconsciously lit up when they heard this. They also looked left and right, then said in a low voice, "Roughly how old?" "Around 200 years. "What? Around 200 years? One of the rogue cultivators spat out. Soon after, he was glared at by the other person and hurriedly covered his mouth. The other person couldn't conceal his excitement and said in a low voice, "Fellow Taoist, please tell us, what spirit herb is it?" Xiaohua said with a smile, "It's nothing but blood exhaustion grass, broken bell wood, and the like, extremely ordinary." "And, fellow Taoist, you're really almighty. These extremely ordinary spirit herbs can actually be so old. Alas, what a pity." One person sighed with emotion, "If exquisite grass," Xiaohua interrupted that person's words without the slightest hesitation, "Fellow Taoist, if I had 200-year-old exquisite grass, would I still be standing here?" That's. That person smiled and nodded. He glanced at the other person and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist, although this spirit herb is ordinary, it's superior in age. If it's too much, of course it's not too much." Xiaohua clapped his hands and took out the spirit herbs he'd prepared long ago from his storage pouch, handing them over. "And, not bad. Although it's less than 200 years old, it's not too far off." That person took it, looked at it, and said with a smile, "A 200-year-old main ingredient is naturally worth 10 mid-grade spirit stones. However, this ordinary spirit grass is only worth 6 or 7 mid-grade spirit stones. If fellow Taoist agrees, then this poor Taoist will give fellow Taoist the corresponding talisman ink." "And, sure." Xiaohua didn't know the specific exchange amount. There were plenty of 200-year-old spirit herbs in his space, so he didn't care too much. Seeing that Xiaohua was very forthright, the two rogue cultivators were also very happy. They handed the corresponding talisman ink to Xiaohua and let him put it away in his storage pouch. Soon after, Xiaohua took out some talisman paper and a very ordinary-looking talisman brush. "Fellow Taoist, please take care," Seeing that Xiaohua had put away everything, the two were preparing to close their eyes again. Xiaohua hesitated for a moment, then cupped his hands and said, "Fellow Taoists, I still have something I want to ask." "What is it?" "Just now, you two fellow Taoists said that you can make fireball talismans, then, may I ask, are you willing to part with the method of making other yellow talismans?" Xiaohua probed. "Hehe, fellow Taoist. Yellow talismans are easy to find, but making talismans is difficult. Even the method of making fireball talismans is hard to find. You still want the method of making other yellow talismans?" One of them said with a fake smile. "Yes, I have the method of making icicle talismans here. If fellow Taoist wants it, you can exchange it with a 300-year-old exquisite grass." The other one directly said. "Ai, then. I will take my leave." Xiaohua cupped his hands and whispered, "I still haven't seen what exquisite grass looks like." Xiaohua left the stall and walked for a moment. At this time, he had already bought all the materials needed to make talismans. He also knew that the method of making talismans wasn't something that could be easily exchanged, so he extinguished his thoughts and only walked around with his eyes. Sure enough, this EG was filled with all kinds of strange things. Anything used by cultivators could be found here. There were many extremely strange things that Xiaohua had never seen before, he had never even heard of. This is... While Xiaohua was looking around with great interest, he saw a dozen or so cultivators surrounding a stall in front of him. Thus, he quickly walked over. This stall was the same as the stall where he exchanged for talisman ink just now. It was all about making talismans, and behind the stall was a cultivator wearing a cloak. Judging from the style of her Taoist robe, she should be a female cultivator. When Xiaohua saw what was written on the stall, he couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. His heart was somewhat restless. On the stall, it was written, "Incomplete method of making confinement talismans in exchange for 10 Peiyuan pill." Confinement talismans were high-level yellow talismans. They were far from low-level offensive yellow talismans like fireball talismans. If it was like what the two rogue cultivators said just now, the method of making confinement talismans was far from being comparable to 10 Peiyuan pill. Yes, it's incomplete. I just don't know how it's incomplete. Xiaohua slightly frowned. At this time, he heard a female cultivator in front of him softly ask, "Fellow Taoist, where exactly is your method of making confinement talismans incomplete?" "Fellow Taoist, do you have 10 Peiyuan pill? If you do, please take it out and show it to me. I will naturally tell you." Although the corners of the female cultivator's mouth were smiling, her tone wasn't gentle at all. The female cultivator who asked the question was given the cold shoulder. She shook her head, turned around, and walked away. 10 Peiyuan pill isn't a small number. This fellow Taoist didn't even say where the method of making confinement talismans is incomplete. Who would want to exchange with her? The nearby cultivators all discussed in low voices. "Fellow Taoist, I have a Peiyuan pill here, but I don't know, where is the flaw in your method of making confinement talismans?" A cultivator around the 6th level of qi refining who didn't conceal his cultivation stepped out from the crowd and asked with a smile. "Hehe, fellow Taoist, please take out the Peiyuan pill first." The female cultivator who was only at the 5th level of qi refining still said with a smile. "Fellow Taoist, please inspect it." The male cultivator clapped his hands and took out a jade bottle from his storage pouch, handing it over to the female cultivator. After the female cultivator inspected it, she smiled and said, "It really is a Peiyuan pill. Fellow Taoist, please take care of it." As she spoke, she picked up a yellow talisman from her stall and activated it with her magic power. Instantly, the voices of the two cultivators disappeared. Xiaohua, who was standing behind them, saw the two of them talking back and forth. The male cultivator's expression gradually became unsightly. However, after a short while, he turned around and walked away, no longer paying attention to them, the direction that the male cultivator was walking in happened to be next to Xiaohua. Xiaohua and the cultivator next to him all heard their conversation clearly. They're really going too far. What incomplete method of making confinement talismans? There's simply no method to inscribe talismans. This confinement talisman simply can't be made. How can it be worth 10 peiyuan pill? Chapter 1320. After hearing that male cultivator's words, the cultivators who were watching the excitement from the side all looked as if they'd woken up from a dream. They all carried resentment and dispersed in a hubbub. Only Xiaohua, who was at the side, was somewhat baffled by what he heard. Seeing that everyone had dispersed, Xiaohua hurriedly pulled an old man who was walking past him, bowed, and asked, "Senior, please wait. Junior has something to ask." That old man was already around the 7th level of qi refining. He raised his eyes to look at Xiaohua and nodded, "Fellow Taoist, please speak." Xiaohua asked, "Junior doesn't understand what that fellow Taoist just said about this incomplete confinement talisman. Senior, please enlighten me." "Oh, this." That old man pursed his lips and smiled, "Fellow Taoist is a loose cultivator, right?" "That's right." Xiaohua nodded and said, "That's why Junior isn't very clear about this talisman crafting technique. Please give me some pointers." "And, it can't be considered pointers. Fellow Taoist should know that this confinement talisman is a high-grade yellow talisman, right?" Junior knows. Moreover, Junior also knows a bit about the talisman crafting technique, but I've never heard of any writing technique. Xiaohua explained. The talisman crafting technique fellow Taoist knows must be the talisman crafting technique of low-grade yellow talismans. Xiaohua didn't deny it and said with a smile, "That's right. Junior is a loose cultivator. How could I possibly know the talisman crafting technique of high-grade yellow talismans?" Hee, it's not like loose cultivators definitely don't know the talisman crafting technique of high-grade yellow talismans. That old man said with a smile, "One of the differences between crafting high-grade yellow talismans, middle-grade yellow talismans, and low-grade yellow talismans is that high-grade yellow talismans must have a writing technique." "Why is that? Why can't low-grade and middle-grade yellow talismans be used?" Xiaohua had an appearance of thirst for knowledge. He originally didn't have to say this, but what if he did? The old man felt a sense of satisfaction in his heart as he smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist, this kind of thing is very complicated. Only when teaching yellow talismans would a teacher explain it in detail. Since you are so eager to learn, I will explain it simply." Soon after, he pointed at the female cultivator and said, "The reason why her confinement talisman is a high-grade yellow talisman is because the talisman characters used to refine it are extremely complicated. It is far from being comparable to low-grade yellow talismans like fireball talismans and icicle talismans. I presume fellow Taoist has also tried out icicle talismans. You only need to carefully memorize those talismans and then use a talisman brush to write the talisman characters onto the talisman paper within a certain amount of time. There is no need for any writing method. However, the talisman characters of this high-grade yellow talisman are very complicated. If the talisman characters drawn with talisman ink cannot be completely written onto the talisman paper within a certain amount of time, the talisman ink will not be able to confine the magic power and spiritual energy within the talisman characters. The magic power and spiritual energy will dissipate into the air. Therefore, every high-grade yellow talisman has a special writing method to guarantee that you can completely write the talisman characters of this high-grade yellow talisman onto the talisman paper within a certain amount of time. Ah! There is such a thing. Xiaohua's heart was wild with joy when he heard this, but his mouth turned pale with fright. Senior is saying that this female fellow Taoist's talisman crafting method, isn't it not worth a single low-grade spirit stone? Hee, you can't say it like that. If someone knew the writing method of the confinement talisman, wouldn't this talisman crafting method be able to be used? After all, it's a high-grade yellow talisman crafting method. 10 Peiyuan pills can't be considered expensive. But, since someone knew the writing method of the confinement talisman, they naturally also knew the refining method of the confinement talisman. Would they still spend 10 Peiyuan pills for this incomplete refining method? Xiao Hua said with a smile. Ha ha ha, of course, I didn't think of this. The old man laughed loudly, cupped his hands, and quickly walked away. After the old man left, Xiao Hua looked at the female cultivator's stall and slowly walked closer. Although the group of cultivators from before had already dispersed, the confinement talisman was indeed attractive. Not long after, a group of cultivators gathered again. Just like before, there were also people who went forward to inquire. When they found out the real reason, everyone dispersed again. After a few rounds of this, the female cultivator had already destroyed several silence talismans. She was clearly somewhat impatient. When the last group of people dispersed, she erased the words. As expected, the number of people coming to her stall decreased by a lot. Xiao Hua had been standing at the side quietly observing. Seeing that there were fewer people, he walked forward. Without waiting for him to cup his hands and salute, the female cultivator sneered and said, "Fellow Taoist has been watching for a long time. Could it be that you're interested in the refining method I have?" Xiao Hua was stunned. He didn't expect that he would still be noticed. He could only say embarrassedly, "Fellow Taoist knows that I am indeed interested." Then why didn't fellow Taoist come forward earlier? I don't have the Peiyuan pill that fellow Taoist is talking about. Of course I don't dare to come forward. Xiao Hua said with a smile. Oh. Since you don't have the Peiyuan pill, if you come forward now, I won't exchange it with you. The female cultivator frowned and said in confusion. Fellow Taoist, please use the silence talisman. I will tell fellow Taoist in detail. You have something else? The female cultivator asked. Yes. Xiao Hua nodded. Marrow cleansing pill. I don't want that. The female cultivator shook her head. No, Xiao Hua also shook his head. Fellow Taoist, don't guess. Okay, I hope you won't make I waste another silence talisman. The female cultivator sighed and used the silence talisman. Xiao Hua smiled bitterly and said inwardly, what silence talisman are you wasting? Others already know that your refining method is incomplete. Wouldn't you be burying your head in the sand by doing this? Seeing the female cultivator use the silence talisman, Xiao Hua said with a smile, I don't have the Peiyuan pill, but I do have the absorption fruit and black tusk grass. I don't know if fellow Taoist is interested. I was wondering what it was. So it's the absorption fruit and black tusk grass. Fellow Taoist, you must be tired. I wasted a silence talisman. The female cultivator sighed and said, I do have the absorption fruit and black tusk grass. I just don't know how to refine pills. That's why I came to Jingbua City's EG to exchange my talisman refining method for the Peiyuan pill. Xiao Hua was also disappointed. However, he still didn't want to give up and asked, then, how old is your absorption fruit? Naturally, it's 30 years old. Is there even a need to ask? The female cultivator was stunned. If I had 100-year-old one, I would have already taken it to 10,000 Flowers Valley to ask Medicine Master Sui to refine it. Why would I need to come here? When Xiao Hua heard this, he was overjoyed. He said in a low voice, then what if I had 100-year-old absorption fruit and black tusk grass? Would fellow Taoist be willing to exchange? Ah. You really have them? When the female cultivator heard this, her face revealed a pleasantly surprised expression. I do have them. However, the quantity isn't much. I don't know how much fellow Taoist needs. Xiao Hua said calmly. 3 absorption fruits and 3 black tusk grass are enough to refine 10 Peiyuan pill. Adding 1 more absorption fruit and asking medicine master Sui to refine it should be possible. The female cultivator calculated for a moment and asked very nervously, I don't know if fellow Taoist has them. This. Xiaohua sighed and shook his head. I only have 2 absorption fruits and 2 black tusk grass. Before he finished speaking, the female cultivator was extremely disappointed. 2 can't refine 10 Peiyuan pill. Xiaohua smiled and said, however, this poor Taoist's 2 kinds of spiritual herbs are both around 200 years old. If fellow Taoist were to give them to 10,000 Flower Valley's medicine master Sui, perhaps you would be able to obtain 10 essence nurturing pills. Ah! Are they really 200 years old? The female cultivator was immediately pleasantly surprised. If it's really like this, medicine master Sui can make an exception. Fellow Taoist, please take a look. Xiaohua took out a jade bottle. When the female cultivator saw it, she repeatedly nodded and said happily, fellow Taoist is right. It's exactly 200 years old. As she spoke, she slapped her storage pouch and took out a booklet. She smiled and said, fellow Taoist, please take a look. I's refining method for this confinement talisman is missing the method to inscribe the talisman. Xiaohua took it and cautiously looked at it. He also said, fellow Taoist's words aren't wrong. Then. Fellow Taoist, are you willing to exchange? At this time, it was the female cultivator's turn to be uneasy. Of course, fellow Taoist, please take good care of it. Xiaohua smiled and slapped his storage pouch, taking out the remaining essence-absorbing fruit and black tusk grass. Soon after, he put the confinement talisman booklet into his storage pouch. Very good. They're all of full medicinal age. The female cultivator put the spiritual herbs into her storage pouch and cupped her hands. Thank you for your help, fellow Taoist. No matter. You're good, I'm good too. Xiaohua beamed and said. Soon after, he said casually, I wonder if fellow Taoist has the method to refine icicle talismans. When the female cultivator heard this, she smiled and said, I indeed have the method to refine icicle talismans. However, I don't have anything I want to exchange. If fellow Taoist has 100 high-grade spirit stones or something like a foundation establishment pill, I can still consider it. Xiaohua smiled wryly and cupped his hands. Just pretend I didn't say anything. Farewell. Fellow Taoist, take care. The female cultivator cupped her hands and returned the courtesy. After obtaining the method to refine confinement talismans, Xiaohua was quite happy. His method to refine yellow talismans was different from others. He didn't use any talisman brushes, so there was no so-called writing method. Of course, this was all his guess. Whether or not he was able to refine confinement talismans would have to wait until he returned to the inn. Xiaohua walked for a while and saw many stalls. There were a lot of things on the stalls, and Xiaohua also wanted them all. However, what he lacked the most were cultivation techniques, alchemy techniques, and talisman crafting techniques. And these, he simply didn't see any trace of them. Just as he was looking left and right, he saw an unremarkable stall. This stall was extremely small, only 1 square foot. The owner of the stall was about the same age as Xiaohua, but his cultivation was at the 5th level of the qi refining realm. This cultivator wasn't tall and had a dark and rough appearance. He seemed to have very honest and considerate facial features, similar to Zhang Qingxiao's. This cultivator's stall had some spiritual herbs that were 10 years old. There weren't many of them, but the varieties were very complicated. Many of them were things that Xiaohua had seen in books but had never seen before. Seeing these, Xiaohua's eyes lit up and he quickly walked over. This stall was extremely cold and cheerless. The cultivator held a thick book in his hand and was reading it with great interest. He simply didn't notice Xiaohua's arrival. Fellow Taoist. Xiaohua cupped his hands and said, "Oh, fellow Taoist, these spiritual herbs are all one low-grade spirit stone each. If fellow Taoist fancies one, just put down the spirit stone and take the spiritual herb." The cultivator didn't even raise his head and said loudly. Chapter 13:21. Ah! There's such an exchange. When Xiaohua heard the cultivator's words, he couldn't help but smile. He cupped his hands and said, "Fellow cultivator, I have some things I want to talk to you about." The cultivator impatiently put down the book and pointed at the small stall. "Fellow Taoist, this poor Taoist has already said it clearly. This poor Taoist's spirit herbs are all here. If fellow Taoist wants them, then take the spirit stones. If not, then go somewhere else. Fellow Taoist must disturb this poor Taoist's cultivation. This is a great sin." Xiaohua smiled and said, "What I need, your stall doesn't have, noisy. If you don't have it, then what the hell are you talking about? Just leave." As the cultivator spoke, he picked up the book again. This poor Taoist wants to discuss with fellow Taoist about buying some spirit grass seeds from fellow Taoist. Xiaohua whispered his thoughts. Buy seeds? The cultivator was stunned. He immediately put down the book and showed a curious expression. "What do you want seeds for? Aren't the spiritual herbs I have enough for your needs?" When the cultivator said this, Xiaohua was stunned. He said curiously, "Fellow cultivator, if you want to sell, then tell I that you can. If you don't want to sell, then tell I that you can't. Why do you care if I want to buy seeds?" Xiaohua's words were very similar to what the cultivator said just now. Xiaohua was prepared. As long as the cultivator turned hostile, he would turn around and leave. E.g. was so big, how could he worry about not being able to buy spiritual herb seeds? Strangely, when Xiaohua said this, the cultivator laughed and cupped his hands. "I'm Ling Zhongyu of the Grass Spirit Sect. How should I address you?" Strange, this person's temper is really strange. When you talk to him nicely, he ignores you. When you scold him, he learns to be obedient. Xiaohua thought to himself. He also cupped his hands and said, "I'm Xiaohua. Oh, fellow cultivator Xiao, don't blame I for talking too much. I have been in EG for many years, but it's always people who come to buy spiritual herbs. I've never heard of anyone buying seeds, so I was curious." Ling Zhongyu said with a smile. "And after seeing your fake cultivation and your concealed cultivation, I feel that fellow cultivator Zhao's cultivation is about the same as mine. Maybe fellow cultivator Xiao and I are the same kind of people." Xiaohua was stunned. "Who? Ha, is there a need to say? If you want to buy seeds, what else can you do if you don't want to study spiritual herbs?" Ling Zhongyu picked up the book that was thrown aside and shook it. Xiaohua saw clearly that there were two big words on it, Codex of Herbs. "Oh, this is good stuff." Xiaohua's heart jumped. Then, he said, "Fellow cultivator, you're really the same kind of person." Sigh, because of spiritual herbs, I's cultivation was delayed. "Fellow cultivator, can you let I take a look at this Codex of Herbs?" "Of course." Ling Zhongyu carefully handed over the Codex of Herbs and said with a smile, "I am the same. Master said that if it weren't for the fact that I put too much effort into spiritual herbs, my cultivation could have increased by a few levels." Seeing that Ling Zhongyu handed over the Codex of Herbs without hesitation, Xiaohua's heart was very warm. He casually flipped through it a few times. This is fierce sungrass. He accidentally flipped to a fiery red spiritual herb that looked like fire. Xiaohua frowned. A name jumped out from his mind. Fierce sungrass. This fierce sungrass should be called fierce sungrass, right? But I don't think I've seen the picture of this fierce sungrass in Shanghuaming. How do I know that it should be called fierce sun grass? Xiao Hua was surprised. He handed the codex of herbs over and asked, "Fellow cultivator Ling, this fierce sun grass. Is there another name called fierce sun grass?" "What? Another name?" Ling Zhongyu took the codex of herbs and casually glanced at it. He immediately denied it. Fierce sun grass doesn't have another name. Moreover, I have never heard of any fierce sun grass. Could it be, there's a fierce sun grass in your sect's ancient books? Speaking up to here, Ling Zhongyu's eyes were filled with fervor. Xiao Hua shook his head with a wry smile and said, "This poor Taoist only saw it from an incomplete page of a book. That page was lost long ago. Even if this poor Taoist wanted to give it to fellow Taoist, it was impossible. So it's like this. What else is on that page?" Ling Zhongyu asked in disappointment. Hearing this, the appearance and names of some spiritual herbs indeed appeared in Xiao Hua's mind. Something like dragon scale fruit, something like iron bone grass, they were all strange spiritual herbs. They are all strange spiritual herbs. There are no records of them in the ordinary codex of herbs. Xiao Hua laughed. Sigh, what a pity. I can't take a look. Ling Zhongyu was rather disappointed. It seemed like he was really obsessed with studying spiritual herbs. By the way, fellow cultivator Ling, what do you plan to do about what I said just now? Xiao Hua changed the topic. Fellow cultivator, are you talking about seeds? Ling Zhongyu regained his senses and asked. Yes. I wonder if fellow cultivator is willing to part with them. Seeds of spiritual herbs. In other sects, such as the 10,000 Flower Valley or the 100 Herbs faction, they might not agree so easily. Even if they agree, I'm afraid they won't be able to find many seeds. But for my grass spirit sect. It's nothing. My grass spirit sect specializes in growing spiritual herbs. Xiao Hua was overjoyed when he heard this. He cupped his hands and said, "Then fellow cultivator Ling, how do you want to exchange for these seeds? Do you want spirit stones? Or, do you want other things?" Of course spirit stones are the best. Ling Zhongyu laughed. If you don't have spirit stones, fellow cultivator Zhao's spiritual pills are also fine. How about 100-year-old spiritual herbs? Or middle-grade yellow talismans? Xiao Hua hesitated and asked. Let's go with spirit stones and spiritual pills. My grass spirit sect doesn't lack anything else. Ling Zhongyu laughed. Then. Alright. Although Xiao Hua wanted to use high-grade fireball talismans to exchange for spirit stones, Ling Zhongyu didn't lack them. He could only use real middle-grade spirit stones to exchange. Perhaps it was because Xiao Hua also liked spirit grasses, the price Ling Zhongyu quoted was very cheap, far exceeding Xiao Hua's expectations. Xiao Hua was very satisfied, but when Xiao Hua was about to take out the spirit stones, he was stopped by Ling Zhongyu. Fellow Taoist Xiao, this poor Taoist came to Yi to sell spirit grasses, how could I bring these seeds? What this poor Taoist said to fellow Taoist today, I will report to Master when I return to the mountain. If nothing unexpected happens, I will be able to bring the seeds you need in 3 days. 3 days later. Xiao Hua was slightly stunned. However, after thinking for a while, he realized that Ling Zhongyu was right. Who would bring so many seeds for no reason? Then. Since fellow cultivator wants to return to the mountain, I wonder. Can you bring the seeds of your sect's spiritual herbs? Oh, or the seeds that can't germinate and are no longer used can be brought to I as well. Xiao Hua's words were somewhat exorbitant. Ling Zhongyu frowned. After thinking for a while, he nodded and said, I can understand fellow cultivator's thoughts. When you see the grass spirit book, you only want to plant all the spiritual herbs recorded in it. Only then will you be satisfied. But I wonder if master will agree. Hee, then please put in a good word for me, fellow cultivator Ling. Xiaohua cupped his hands and said. Hee, all right. Since I have agreed, I will do my best. Fellow cultivator, don't worry. Please come and get it in 3 days. Ling Zhongyu said with a smile. Thank you for your help, fellow cultivator Ling. Xiaohua cupped his hands and thanked him. After he took 2 steps, he stopped again with a hesitant expression. Ling Zhongyu had a good impression of Xiaohua. Seeing him hesitate, he took the initiative and said with a smile, fellow cultivator Xiao, could it be that there's something wrong? Xiaohua looked at him and then looked around. After choosing his words, he asked, alas, fellow cultivator Ling, actually I also want to get some spiritual herbs for a living like your sect. But, the spiritual herbs in e.g., the price is really too low. It's not easy to make a living. After hearing this, Ling Zhongyu felt the same way. With a sympathetic look, he almost hugged Xiaohua and said, fellow cultivator Xiao is right. Spiritual herbs that are decades old and centuries old are rare. But even so, they can't be compared to those yellow talismans and elixirs. It's because the techniques of refining elixirs and creating talismans are really secret techniques. Very few people know them. And planting spiritual herbs is simple. Who doesn't know how to do it? It's just a matter of whether the planting is good or bad. Even if they don't know how to do it, they can go to places with rich spiritual energy. Most of the time, they can find them. No wonder the price of spiritual herbs is so low. As the saying goes, skills have their own specialties. The rarer something is, the more valuable it is. Xiaohua sighed. Yes, exactly. Ling Zhongyu nodded. How about, there are a lot fewer cultivators like you and me who study spiritual herbs. The two talked for a while, then Xiaohua took his leave. After settling the matter of the seeds, Xiaohua's mood was very good. The reverse light in his mind's space rotated every day, and the light was also shining all the time. Planting a few more spirit grasses and planting a few less spirit grasses didn't seem to have much of an effect. Moreover, there seemed to be a lot of empty space inside the space. Xiaohua only needed about 10 feet of space to store things. Xiaohua actually wanted to plant spirit grasses inside the space. That would be 2 years of growth in a day. Casually taking out a stock of spirit grasses could be exchanged for spirit stones or spirit pills. Looking at the sky, and then looking at the places he had just explored, Xiaohua knew that this EG was definitely not something he could explore in a day. Moreover, other than high-grade fireball talismans and 200-year-old spiritual herbs, he really didn't have anything else to exchange. If he took out 200-year-old spiritual herbs many times in a day, wouldn't it be easy for others to notice him? Xiaohua's cultivation was too low. He didn't dare to take this risk. Having developed a vigilant heart, Xiaohua no longer wandered around. Looking left and right, he found EG and took down the camouflage cloth in a secluded place. Looking at the exquisite camouflage cloth in his hand, Xiaohua couldn't help but smile. This camouflage cloth was very comfortable on his body. Although it could only cover his face, Xiaohua felt that exchanging a few high-grade fireball talismans for it was really worth it. And, this young cultivator is also a loose cultivator, but he seems to be quite different from Pai Lan, Duo Xiong, and the others. He relies on his own camouflage cloth to cultivate. He can be considered self-reliant. I just don't know where he cultivates. If I can make friends with him, it would be a good thing. Xiaohua couldn't help but look at the stall before noon, but it was already empty. He didn't know if the camouflage cloth was sold out. Or did that young cultivator leave a step earlier? Oh, right, how is this camouflage cloth made? It can actually change one's face, it's really amazing. Xiaohua thought again. However, when he looked at the camouflage cloth for a long time, he couldn't see anything. Only then did he put it in his storage bag and quickly return to the inn. Since he decided to go to E.G. more often, Xiaohua didn't change inns. He threw a mid-grade spirit stone on the counter and booked a room for 5 days. Taking the yellow talisman from the innkeeper, Xiaohua didn't let the waiter follow him and returned to the room by himself. Now Xiaohua somewhat understood that inside the inn, spirit stones were used for transactions. It seemed that taking out 1 or 2 mid-grade spirit stones wouldn't attract attention, so he didn't hide anything. After returning to the room, Xiaohua didn't rest. He knew that using a talisman brush to draw low-grade fireball talismans was a condition for him to enter Heaven Forsaken. He had to quickly draw the fireball talismans. He didn't want to be unable to enter Heaven Forsaken when he could clearly refine high-grade fireball talismans. Wouldn't that be a matter of eternal regret? Just like before, Xiaohua prepared the talisman ink and talisman paper. Because he knew that he wasn't confident, Xiaohua specially took out the talisman paper he exchanged from E.G. Xiaohua closed his eyes for a moment, still silently reciting the runes of the fireball talisman in his heart. Then he used his hand to grab the talisman brush, dipped it in talisman ink, and smoothly drew on the talisman paper. Chapter 1322. This. I'm afraid this is the 20th talisman paper. Xiaohua's expression was somewhat gloomy as he looked at the talisman paper. The thickness of the talisman paper was uneven, and the talisman characters were somewhat deformed. Xiaohua was incomparably familiar with the talisman characters of the fireball talisman in his mind. He could draw it casually with his hand, but after using the talisman brush, it wasn't that he couldn't control his magic power, but the strength of the brush was different. No matter how he held the light talisman brush, it was simply like a colossal object that weighed tens of thousands of kilograms. He didn't know how to draw it again. Bah, Xiaohua pondered. The talisman paper caught fire with a peng sound. Xiaohua fiercely spat out a mouthful of saliva, threw the talisman brush on the ground, clapped his hand, and took out a high-grade talisman paper. Then, he dipped his hand in talisman ink and flicked his fingers. In a short moment, the talisman characters of the fireball talisman took shape. Immediately after, a strange spell was cast. Huff! After casting the last spell and seeing that the fireball talisman was completed, Xiaohua let out a long breath. It could be considered that he spat out the gloominess of failing to refine the fireball talisman 20 times with the talisman brush. It's really strange. This talisman paper was refined quite smoothly with the fingers. Why, do others have to use a talisman brush to refine it? Oh, it should be drawn. How can a talisman brush be used to refine it? Xiaohua was extremely puzzled. No wonder Senior Ma said that this talisman crafting method is very difficult. It can only be successfully refined many times. I only wasted 20 talisman papers. It's not much. Xiaohua looked at the talisman brush on the ground and was too lazy to refine it again. To tell the truth, if anyone could refine a high-grade yellow talisman, who would rack their brains and painstakingly struggle to draw a low-grade yellow talisman? There's nothing I can do, nothing I can do. Xiaohua muttered and took out the small booklet with the incomplete confinement talisman. This was the happiest thing for him today. Of course, he had to leave it for last to enjoy. Xiaohua took out the booklet. This booklet was much thicker than the small booklet for the fireball talisman. There were also many more talisman characters inside. The annotations, explanations, and so on were all complete. Unfortunately, at the end of the booklet, there were a few pages missing, and it seemed very incomplete. Of course, this kind of imperfection was only for others. Xiaohua didn't think so. He first roughly looked at it. Although Xiaohua had never seen the runes of this confinement talisman before, it looked really complicated. It was more than a level more troublesome than the fireball talisman's runes. However, it was one thing for Xiaohua to look at it, but moving it with his fingers was another thing. Xiaohua read the runes of the imprisonment talisman several times, then closed the booklet and memorized the runes in his heart. While memorizing the runes, his fingers couldn't help but move. Not only one hand, but the other hand also moved. An extremely nimble feeling came from his fingertips. The magic power in his body was also extremely free and easy as it flowed to his fingertips along with the hand seals. Xiaohua almost had a feeling that if it wasn't for the lack of a certain opportunity, he could almost directly inscribe the runes in this technique onto the talisman paper. Hehe, could it be that this young master is really a talisman crafting genius? Xiaohua was all smiles, and his little tail was already curled up. He dipped his finger into the ink, and his 5 fingers started to draw runes in the air. However, things were not as Xiaohua had imagined. The runes of this confinement talisman were rather complicated. After using the ink, because he had to control his spiritual power and drive the ink to wrap spiritual power, it was not as easy as just waving his fingers. Before he could finish drawing all the runes, the spiritual chi of heaven and earth wrapped in the ink had already dissipated, and the ink scattered all over the ground. This. What's going on? Xiaohua listened, and his eyes stared blankly at the dissipating spiritual power. He was somewhat depressed. Could it be that without the method of inscribing the runes, this confinement talisman really can't be refined? Thinking about it, the method of inscribing the confinement talisman was combined with the previous method of inscribing the runes. It was something that countless ancestors of the Dawn Rain continent had practiced and created. Xiaohua erased the method of inscribing the confinement talisman as soon as he came up and wanted to successfully refine it. Opening up a new path, how? Could it be simple and easy? Xiaohua thought for a moment, and tried a few more times. The result was the same, he couldn't finish inscribing the runes every time. Soon after, Xiaohua tried using his other hand, and the result was the same. Alas, Xiaohua shook his hand, and the ink was thrown away. He said self-deprecatingly, "It seems that this young master was too arrogant." As he spoke, he sat down cross-legged, closed his eyes, and adjusted his breathing. After an unknown amount of time, Xiaohua suddenly jumped up from the ground, and energetically patted his storage pouch. He took out the talisman paper, ink, and booklet containing the confinement talisman. He was still muttering, "Damn it, why am I so stupid? Why can't I do this? Why didn't I think of it before?" Xiaohua carefully looked at the runes of the confinement talisman a few more times. He was still muttering, but no words could be heard. The fingers of his 2 hands were still nimble. What was different from before was that the hand seals of Xiaohua's 2 hands were different. Soon after, when Xiaohua felt that he was already proficient, he waved his hands and dipped them in ink. His 10 fingers flicked together, and he actually used both hands to execute the same hand seal. The first round of the hand seal wasn't very smooth, and there were many places where Xiaohua's mind couldn't keep up. But strangely, Xiaohua's hands were extremely fluent in making up for these flawed places. There was no need for Xiaohua's mind to cooperate. When Xiaohua finished inscribing, the ink that wrapped the spiritual power didn't dissipate, but because the runes were drawn with both hands at the same time, it seemed slightly unbalanced. The corner of Xiaohua's mouth curled up into a smile. He didn't use the final spell and allowed the rune to gradually disappear. Looking at the time when the runes began to disappear, it was actually a long time later. Oh, so it's like this. Once the runes of the confinement talisman are completely drawn, the spiritual power of heaven and earth can flow between the runes without leaking, and the runes can also be preserved for a long time. If the runes aren't completely drawn, the spiritual power of heaven and earth may flow into the air. The so-called method of writing runes must be a method to control the spiritual power of heaven and earth and not let it dissipate easily in the air. Immediately, Xiaohua tried a dozen more times. Every time, he didn't use the final technique. He only drew the rune of the imprisonment talisman in the air. As the rune became more complete, the time the rune stayed in the air became longer and longer. Actually, if I can stop this rune, I don't need to draw it on the talisman paper. It can also turn into a yellow talisman. The idea was very easy, but it was extremely difficult to do. Xiaohua didn't know what to use to replace the talisman paper and the ink. When the last confinement talisman stopped in the air, Xiaohua's hand seals changed, and the runes gradually flashed, absorbing the spiritual power of heaven and earth in the surroundings. Along with the hand seal in Xiaohua's hand, qi sound was heard, and the runes entered a high-grade talisman paper. With a flash of brilliance, a confinement talisman was successfully refined by Xiaohua without any mishap. Like I said, I am a genius at refining yellow talismans. Xiaohua's eyes were so mesmerized that they became slits. He very lovingly picked up the extremely exquisite confinement talisman. The confinement talisman was earth yellow in color, and the talisman characters on it were densely packed like a fine spider web. These fine talisman characters seemed to be floating on top of the talisman paper. With a slight movement of his fingers, the earth yellow brilliance faintly flowed like mercury. Just this appearance alone was several grades higher than the fireball talisman. It was truly worthy of being called a high-level yellow talisman. I don't know what grade this confinement talisman is. No matter what, it should be a middle-grade talisman. Xiaohua thought in his heart, and he checked the spiritual power in his body. The check wasn't very tight, and his spiritual power increased a bit. Although it wasn't much, it was still a bit more than refining the fireball talisman. It seemed that refining confinement talismans was also a good way to cultivate. Thinking that the agreed time with Ling Zhongyu was 3 days later, Xiaohua didn't want to go to Yi anymore. He hid in the inn and alternately refined the fireball talisman and confinement talisman. At the same time, he also comprehended the Tao of Heaven and cultivated Shanghua Ming's second level of qi refining cultivation technique. 3 days passed extremely quickly, and in the blink of an eye, it was time. Xiaohua very reluctantly came out from the inn. If it wasn't for the inn's daily payment of 20 low-grade spirit stones, if it wasn't for Xiaohua didn't have any cultivation techniques above the second level of qi refining to cultivate, if it wasn't for the limited spiritual energy of heaven and earth in the inn, if it wasn't for Xiaohua's 3 days of cultivation were only equivalent to a day for others, Xiaohua really wanted to continue cultivating in such a leisurely manner. However, in these 3 days, Xiaohua's harvest was also huge. In addition to the increase in his spiritual power and the advancement of his cultivation, the talisman ink and talisman paper exchanged from EG were all refined into fireball talismans and confinement talismans. The only thing that made Xiaohua feel regretful was that the fireball talisman he refined with the talisman pen still didn't succeed. After leaving the inn, Xiaohua pinched the message talisman in his storage bag and felt a little bewildered. It's already been a few days, but I still haven't seen Senior Ma's message. Should I send a message talisman to ask? But, what if he wants me to test it? I also can't draw a fireball talisman. It's better not to send a message first. Wait until I get the spirit grass seeds and let the puppet sow them in the space first. I should draw a fireball talisman first. The cultivation technique, that's the most important thing. Xiaohua thought and arrived outside EG. He found a remote place and put on the so-called camouflage cloak before entering EG. Today's EG was just as lively as a few days ago, but the people were different. And, as for how many cultivators there were compared to a few days ago, only the heavens knew. At the very least, Xiaohua who was wearing the camouflage cloak was the same. Cough cough. There was also that young cultivator who was selling Taoist robes the moment he entered EG. Everyone, come and take a look. This is a top-notch Taoist robe. Aside from having no defense, it has all the functions of removing dust, removing odors, and so on. It's much cheaper than the Taoist robes that fellow Taoist usually uses. Fellow Taoist, don't look at how your Taoist robe is of the highest quality. However, fellow Taoist should always wear something else. Who knows when it might be of use? Hearing this somewhat familiar voice, the corner of Xiao Hua's mouth slightly rose. Chapter 1323. Seeing that there weren't many people in front of his stall, Xiao Hua cupped his hands and smiled. Fellow Taoist Fu, seeing this, the young cultivator smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist, you really have good eyesight." "Hey," fellow Taoist's bewilderment looks quite familiar. "Hee, I exchanged fireball talismans for this 3 days ago." Does fellow Taoist Fu still remember? "Ha, of course I do." The cultivator laughed. Fellow Taoist Xiao's fireball talismans are really good. I have already exchanged them for many good things. This is all thanks to fellow Taoist Xiao. Xiao Hua hurriedly waved his hands and said that he didn't dare. "Right, fellow Taoist Xiao, do you still have fireball talismans today?" The cultivator became interested. Looking at his stall, he smiled and said, "How about you give me some Taoist robes? I'll give you a discount." Xiao Hua didn't want these. He waved his hands and said with a smile, "I don't have any more fireball talismans on me. I just came here to look around. I don't plan to buy anything. So it's like this. Then, fellow Taoist Xiao, you can look around first." The young cultivator's expression changed slightly. He was about to greet others when Xiao Hua immediately called out, "Right, fellow Taoist Fu, I heard fellow Taoist mention a few days ago that you're also a loose cultivator." "Hee, I wasn't a loose cultivator before. It's just that I encountered some things later on and had no choice but to become a loose cultivator. Fortunately, I have some skills and can make some very basic magic tools. I can barely take care of my own cultivation." It seemed that he didn't want to say more. Magic tools. These are all magic tools. Xiao Hua looked at the Taoist robes in his hands and asked curiously. Seeing that there were no cultivators nearby, Zhao Yan turned his head and said, "These Taoist robes and the bewilderment on your body can all be considered magic tools. It's just that they're extremely crude. Qiqiao sect focuses on refining magic tools. Sect Master Taoist Lu Hong is a famous master refiner in my country of Xi. Fellow Taoist Fu's refining skills." Xiao Hua felt that something was wrong halfway through his words and immediately stopped. At the same time, another female cultivator in front of him was attracted by the exquisite Taoist robes. Zhao Yan eloquently introduced them. Xiao Hua took a look, shook his head slightly, and turned around to look for Ling Zongyu. Ling Zongyu's spiritual grass sect stall was still there. Ling Zongyu was still the same, reading the grass codex with relish. Xiao Hua smiled and said, "Taoist Ling." Without waiting for Xiao Hua to finish, Ling Zongyu didn't even raise his head and said, "These spiritual plants cost 1 low-grade spirit stone each. Fellow Taoist, you can put down the spirit stone and take the spiritual plant that you like." His tone and words were exactly the same as 3 days ago. Presumably, he had to say these words every day. "Hee, fellow Taoist Ling, have you brought I's spirit grass seeds?" Xiao Hua asked in a slightly louder voice. "Oh, so it's fellow Taoist Xiao. You're finally here. I thought you wouldn't come." When Ling Zongyu heard that, he hurriedly put down the book and removed the storage bag from his waist. He said, "If you don't come, I will be in trouble." Xiao Hua asked curiously, "Didn't fellow Taoist Ling say 3 days later? Isn't today the 4th day? Could it be that I remembered wrongly?" "Oh, right. You really remembered wrongly. When I said 3 days later, it was the 3rd day, which was yesterday. When I returned to the mountain yesterday, I was scolded by Master. He said that I didn't take your deposit. If you really didn't sell it, Master and I would have worked for nothing. I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Xiao Hua smiled and hurriedly took out the promised spirit stones. He said, since that's the case, fellow Taoist Ling, please accept the spirit stones first. I will look at the seeds. It's okay. This storage bag contains the seeds that fellow Taoist Xiao wants. I took out almost all the spiritual plant seeds in the spiritual grass sect. I picked 10 seeds of each spiritual plant. Oh, right, there are also some shriveled seeds in the storage bag. There are also some seeds that I don't know the names of and can't be planted. I'll give them all to fellow Taoist Xiao. As Ling Zhongyu spoke, he took the spirit stones and put them into another storage bag. Then, he handed the storage bag in his hand to Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua opened the storage bag and looked inside. There were indeed many seeds in the storage bag, far exceeding his expectations. He smiled and put the seeds into his storage bag. Xiao Hua cupped his hands and said, "Thank you, fellow Taoist Ling. It's okay, it's okay. If fellow Taoist Xiao comes across any rare spiritual plants in the future, you can bring them to I. The spiritual grass sect is also willing to buy such spiritual plants." Ling Zhongyu waved his hand and took the storage bag with a smile. "Ha, of course, of course." Xiao Hua cupped his hands and bid farewell. After leaving the spiritual grass sect stall, Xiao Hua found a place with fewer people and put the storage bag into the maze. With a stroke of his hand, all the spiritual plant seeds were put into the space. Xiao Hua was still quite anxious. One day in the space was equivalent to 2 years in the outside world. Moreover, while he was refining the yellow talismans and cultivating in the inn, Xiao Hua had already ordered the puppets in the space to cultivate the spiritual plants. Now that he had the seeds in hand, Xiao Hua naturally wouldn't waste any time. After putting the seeds into the space, he ordered the puppets to start planting. Xiao Hua paid attention to the things in the space as he casually walked forward. After walking for about the time it took to eat a meal, he came to a place where there weren't many people. Looking around, Xiao Hua was quite puzzled. This place wasn't small, but there were only a few stalls. The number of people who came here could be counted. It was far from the bustling scene he saw earlier. Xiao Hua looked around and saw that the items in the stalls were all black and yellow. There were all kinds of shapes and sizes. Moreover, he couldn't tell what they were used for. Looking at the few cultivators in front of the stalls, Xiao Hua could see that all of them had cultivations above the 10th level of foundation establishment. There were even 2 that Xiao Hua couldn't see through. If they weren't foundation establishment cultivators, then they were golden core cultivators. Xiao Hua didn't dare to go forward. After hesitating for a moment, he was about to retreat. At this time, he came face to face with a dark and thin man. That man looked a little anxious and walked in a hurry. Moreover, Xiao Hua couldn't see the man's cultivation. Seeing that the man was coming face to face, Xiao Hua was so frightened that he quickly retreated to the side and made way. That man walked past Xiao Hua without even looking at Xiao Hua and went straight to an empty stall. With a clap of his hand, dozens of similar black items were placed on the stall. Then, without waiting for the cultivator to sit down, a water blue brilliance flashed above the stall. A distorted figure appeared in the air. Xiao Hua could see clearly that it was a Jinghua city disciple around the 9th level of qi refinement. "Senior, please pay the admission spirit stones." The disciple very politely cupped his hands and said to the cultivator. The cultivator said in a bad mood, "Didn't you see that I just came? I haven't exchanged anything yet. How can I pay you spirit stones?" "Hee, senior must be joking. As long as you place something in EG and want to exchange, my Jinghua city will charge 10 low-grade spirit stones for admission. These 10 low-grade spirit stones won't be in senior's eyes, right?" The Jinghua city disciple said. "Of course I won't be in senior's eyes. But I haven't started the exchange yet. How can I pay spirit stones? If I don't exchange anything after paying spirit stones, wouldn't I have paid 10 low-grade spirit stones for nothing?" The dark and thin cultivator's anxious expression slowly faded and he began to argue with the Jingbo city disciple. Hee, I'll let senior know. My Jingbo city opened the e-market and e-bazaar for the convenience of fellow cultivators so that they can have a place to trade without worry. 10 low-grade spirit stones for the e-market and 1 mid-grade spirit stone for the e-market are both very cheap. Just based on the fact that my Jingbo city disciples can protect the entire e-market and e-market without any accidents, it is worth it. It's not senior's first time here, so why are you making things difficult for this junior? Hee, I was originally going to participate in the EG Bazaar in 10 days, but there are some urgent matters in the sect and I can't make it back in 10 days. Don't you think I's depressed? I would rather pay you 1 spirit stone. I wouldn't dare. Today is EG. Senior only needs to pay 10 low-grade spirit stones. The Jingbo city disciple was clearly well-trained and his words were watertight. Okay, you can go now. Don't delay I's exchange. With that, the cultivator took out 10 spirit stones from his storage bag and threw them over. The Jingbo city disciple took the spirit stones and immediately disappeared in a flash. As soon as the figure of the Jingbo city disciple disappeared, the dark and thin cultivator waved his hand, and a dozen large words appeared in front of the stall. Xiaohua then heard the cultivator shout, "Fellow Taoists, this poor Taoist has some rarely seen demonic tools. Originally, I was going to bring them to the market in 10 days, but today, I really had no choice but to take them out. If anyone has good eyesight, come and take a look." This poor Taoist's demonic tools cost 1 top-grade spirit stone each. Ah! Demonic weapons? Top-grade spirit stones? Hearing the dark and thin cultivator's words, Xiaohua was very surprised and thought he had misheard. However, when he saw the large words in front of the cultivator, he knew that he hadn't misheard. When the cultivators at the side heard this, they all gathered around and each took what they wanted and carefully looked at it. The few Foundation establishment cultivators even released their divine senses and scanned it over and over again. Cough cough, fellow cultivators, this is a demonic weapon. Magic power can't be activated, and divine senses can't penetrate it. Why are you using your divine senses? Seeing everyone choose as if they were choosing magic weapons, the dark and thin cultivator couldn't help but frown. He knew that he had come in a hurry today and wouldn't meet any discerning cultivators. Sure enough, those people looked at the demonic artifacts in their hands and coldly glanced at the dark and thin cultivator. Then, they threw away the things in their hands and turned to leave. A few of them walked out of this area and a few of them went to other stalls. Xiaohua didn't dare to go forward and only looked at the demonic weapons on the stall with interest. He often heard Zhang Qingshao talk about the great war between immortals and demons, but he had never seen any demonic weapons. How could he not be curious when he saw one now? However, the demonic weapons on the cultivator's stall were all black and he couldn't see their quality. If the cultivator didn't say it, Xiaohua would never know that these unremarkable things were demonic weapons. Chapter 13:24. That's right, this demonic tool, where did it come from? Xiaohua suddenly came to a realization and said to himself, demonic tools are used by the people of the devil realm. Divine sense and magic power can't be used. What do cultivators like us need them for? Oh, maybe this area is dedicated to selling demonic tools. No wonder there aren't many cultivators here. Xiaohua already understood the reason for the lack of people, so he turned around to leave. This so-called demonic tool was a bit far away from him, so he didn't need to waste time here. However, the instant Xiaohua turned around, a powerful divine sense swept over him and scanned him from top to bottom, from inside to outside. Xiaohua was greatly alarmed and almost stopped. However, he also knew that this was only divine sense and not coercion. A small second-layer chi refining cultivator like him shouldn't have been able to sense it. Therefore, he forcefully suppressed the throbbing in his heart and still turned around, preparing to leave. "Little doll, come over here." A voice sounded as if it was speaking in his ear. Xiao Hua was stunned. That voice belonged to the dark and thin cultivator from a moment ago. Why is he looking for me? Xiao Hua was baffled and could only stop. Soon after, he looked left and right in bewilderment. Then, he pointed at his nose and asked, Is this senior calling this junior? Yes, he's calling you. Apart from you, who else would call you a little doll? The dark and thin cultivator had an impatient expression. He stretched out his right hand and beckoned with his index finger. He called out, "Quickly come over, this old man has something to tell you." "Yes, this junior will go over right away," Xiao Hua replied. He didn't dare to be negligent in the slightest and hurriedly ran in front of that person's stall. He bowed and said, "Senior, I wonder why you called this junior over. First, take off this thing of yours." The dark and thin cultivator coldly said, "What's the use of wearing this thing? This old man can see your true appearance with a single glance. You're just a small second-layer chi refining little doll, what is there that you don't dare to reveal?" Xiao Hua was speechless. After thinking for a moment, he obediently took off the camouflage mask and revealed his true appearance. "Sigh, it's just an ordinary face, what are you afraid of? If you really want to cover your face, then go to the 7 Possibilities sex shop and buy a real masking mask. That thing is useless." The dark cultivator nodded. "Senior, please understand. Junior is a rogue cultivator. I'm afraid that if I do something inappropriate and fall into the eyes of others, I'll attract trouble. That's why I thought of this Miyong. However, Junior really can't afford the Miyong of Qiqiao sect," Xiao Hua honestly replied. "Nonsense, of course I know you're a loose cultivator. You're already so old but you're still in the second layer of chi refining. If you're not a loose cultivator, then what are you? I'm in a great mood today and I like you, so I'll give you a chance. If you can help me with something, I'll tell you my name. In the future, you can use my name to do something. Of course, if your enemy catches you and wants to take your life, you can use my name and maybe they'll let you live. Oh, right, this time. What do you think? This." Hearing the dark cultivator's words, Xiao Hua knew this matter wouldn't be easy. After thinking for a moment, he cupped his hands and said, "Senior, please tell me. I'll see if I can help. Whether I can help or not, I can't say. It depends on whether you're willing to help or not." The old man glanced at Xiao Hua. "Senior, please speak your mind." "Good, it's actually very simple. I have many demonic tools in my stall, you only need to buy one." "Ah." Xiao Hua was stunned and stammered, "Senior, you're not mistaken, right? Junior, just reached the second layer of chi refining and I'm a loose cultivator. Why would I want a demonic tool? A demonic tool isn't a magic tool. It doesn't require spiritual sense or magic power. It doesn't matter if you're in the second layer of chi refining or middle foundation establishment, you can use it. I only let you pick because I like you." The old man's expression changed. "But, won't you consider other people?" Xiao Hua turned his head and wanted to point at other people, but just as he raised his head, he was stunned. Just now, there were still several people strolling around this area, but now, there was no trace of them. Not even a single hair could be seen. There were only several cultivators with their eyes closed, sitting upright behind their respective stalls. It was unknown whether they were adjusting their breathing or recuperating. Xiao Hua was speechless. Who told him to be a second-layer chi refining cultivator? He couldn't outrun them even if he ran. "But, Senior, it's not that I'm being rude. Even if I wanted to buy your demonic tool, I'm just a loose cultivator. How could I take out a supreme-grade spirit stone? To tell the truth, I haven't seen what a supreme-grade spirit stone looks like. Xiao Hua said self-mockingly. You want to see a supreme grade spirit stone, but supreme grade spirit stone doesn't want you. The dark and thin old man mocked, I know you don't have a supreme grade spirit stone, but since you took out 700 or 800 high grade spirit stones, I'll let you pick one at will. 700 or 800 high grade spirit stones? Xiao Hua said in shock, isn't that 7 or 8 supreme grade spirit stones? How is it cheap? You ignorant thing. The dark and thin cultivator cursed, 1,000 high-grade spirit stones is only one supreme-grade spirit stone. I'm really too lazy to talk to you. Quick, take out all the things in your storage bag. I'll let you pick a demonic tool. Ah. Hearing this, Xiao Hua's face turned green. His storage bag contained a lot of spiritual herbs, fireball talismans, forbidden talismans, and some talisman paper, talisman ink, and talisman brushes used to refine yellow talismans. He originally wanted to come to EG to exchange for some good things, but now he regretted it. Why did he put these things in his storage bag? The most important thing was that he did a little calculation. All these things added up were not worth a supreme-grade spirit stone. And even 700 or 800 high-grade spirit stones were not enough. If he took them all out, wouldn't they all be taken away by this dark and thin old man? And what was left for him was nothing more than a demonic tool that was neither good for eating nor drinking, and even more useless. Senior, this junior, indeed has no use for this demonic tool. Xiao Hua's body shrank back. Moreover, the spirit stones in this junior's storage bag will be used for other purposes. Senior, you can't force me to buy or sell, right? Xiao Hua was almost about to cry. He spoke very pitifully. Unfortunately, that dark and thin cultivator was not a person who cherished flowers and cherished the fairer sex. Hearing Xiao Hua's words, his face turned cold, and he said with a smile, Hee, of course, how could this old man dare to force you to buy or sell in this Jingbo city? Even if EG's guards didn't say anything, that city lord Lu wouldn't let this old man off. This old man naturally wouldn't dare to make things difficult for you. Xiao Hua's face eased slightly, but thinking about the conversation between this dark and thin cultivator and the Jingbo city disciple just now, Xiao Hua's heart unconsciously thumped, and he secretly said, it seems, he's not that easy to talk to, right? Sure enough, that old man said unhurriedly, in any case, this old man remembers your face. Unless you live in Jingbo City for the rest of your life and don't take a step out of Jingbo City, otherwise. The old man didn't continue speaking. He merely lowered his head and fiddled with the pitch-black demonic tool on the stall, ignoring Xiao Hua. However, Xiao Hua's face turned pale. This was an undisguised threat, but what could Xiao Hua do? His bewilderment couldn't block the other's divine sense. His true appearance had been seen long ago. Even if he wanted to escape, there was no way to escape. But the problem is, of all the people you could pick, you just had to pick me? Xiao Hua was extremely indignant. After pondering for a while and seeing that no one else had come, Xiao Hua murmured, that. Senior, can you leave this junior some spirit stones? Otherwise, this junior won't have a place to stay at night. Bah, this old man's name isn't limited to just supreme-grade spirit stones. You bought a demonic tool that's rarely seen in the Daybreak Continent's cultivation world and even paid with your life. What's there to be dissatisfied about? You still want this old man to make concessions? Not a chance. The old man said resolutely and decisively. Then, he looked at Xiao Hua's waist and hooked his index finger, still not going to hurry up and give it to this old man. Xiao Hua used his teeth to bite his lip. He was truly hesitant and unwilling to part with it. However, looking at the old man's cold gaze, he still endured it. He reached out and was just about to take something out of his storage pouch when he heard the old man coldly say, "This old man wants you to give me the entire storage pouch. Don't worry, this old man will only take the things worth one supreme-grade spirit stone. I won't touch anything else." Senior, you just said. Xiaohua wanted to argue that it was 700 or 800 high-grade spirit stones, but just as he said it, he didn't know if it was the old man's gaze or if it was because he felt it was boring. He shut his mouth, took off his storage pouch from his waist, and handed it over. TSK, look at your broken storage pouch. This old man has never seen such a broken and cramped space. No wonder you were embarrassed to take it out. What kind of broken things are these? The dark and thin old man took Xiaohua's storage pouch and opened it to take a look. He casually took out a few fireball talismans and imprisonment talismans. With a very disdainful expression, he threw them back in. There are actually a few 200-year-old spirit herbs. This is beyond this old man's expectations. Then, the old man took out a few ordinary spirit herbs and casually looked at them. He smiled and said, "All right, little doll, you take a pile of broken yellow talismans and these spirit herbs. And, there are also a few hundred mid-grade spirit stones to exchange for a demonic tool with this old man." This old man pitied you and reluctantly agreed. "You can choose one." As he spoke, he took all the things in Xiaohua's storage pouch and put them into his own storage pouch. Then, he returned the empty storage pouch to Xiaohua. Looking at the storage pouch that didn't even have a low-grade talisman pen, Xiaohua wanted to cry but had no tears. However, he had already taken out everything. He couldn't just let it go to waste. Xiaohua could only look at the old man's stall with an ashen face. On the stall, the dozen or so demonic tools were very strange and their shapes were also strange. Xiaohua simply didn't know which one was which. After looking for a moment, the old man became impatient and urged, "Little doll, quickly choose one. This old man still has things to do." Yes, Xiaohua looked at it again, and his gaze fell on a broken spear tip. Chapter 1325. This magic tool was pitch black and very similar to the usual spear tip. However, there was a clear crack at the back of the spear tip, as if it was split from the head of a spear. The reason why Xiaohua's gaze fell on this spear tip was purely because he couldn't see the shape of other magic tools, but this spear tip looked somewhat familiar. When the dark skinny old man saw Xiaohua's gaze fall on the spear tip, he immediately stretched out his hand and grabbed the spear tip. His hand paused for a moment and a strange expression appeared on his face. Then he raised his arm and handed the spear tip to Xiaohua and said, "Little kid, did you think of this?" Xiaohua lowered his head and looked at the spear tip in front of him. It was only shining with a dark light and there was nothing special about it. If the old man didn't say that it was a magic tool, he wouldn't have been able to see it. Xiaohua swept a glance at the spear tip. He was somewhat unwilling and wanted to look at other places. "Enough, little guy, take this thing. You want to trade this old man's magic tool with your little things. I don't know if you have accumulated good karma in your previous life, but you shouldn't be discontent." The old man coldly threw the spear point towards Xiaohua's hand. Then, with a wave of his hand, all the magic tools in the booth were collected by him. His movements were very fast, and after a flash, all the items were collected by him. Xiaohua was in a hurry to catch the spear point, so he didn't pay attention to where the old man collected the magic tools. Xiaohua's hand just touched the spear tip when a cold feeling passed from the spear tip to his hand and then up his arm. Almost at the same time, his heart also felt cold. "Io, what's going on?" Xiaohua was greatly alarmed in his heart. However, just as this astonished thought arose in his mind, the weight of the spear tip suddenly dropped down, causing Xiaohua's hand to loosen. The heavy spear tip actually caused Xiaohua to be caught off guard, causing him to drop it to the ground. "Ha ha ha!" The dark skinny old man saw this and laughed loudly. His figure flashed across the sky and flew away at a low altitude. Then, a low voice sounded in Xiaohua's ear, "Little kid, this old man is Mingsue Mountain's Shi Wuming. You can borrow this name once, this old man acknowledges it. Shi Wuming of Mingsui Mountain. Xiao Hua was stunned. He had never heard of this name before. When he raised his head to look again, Shi Wuming was nowhere to be seen. There were still a few stall owners at the side. They lowered their heads and cultivated with their eyes closed. No one paid any attention to him. Sigh. I'm so unlucky. Xiao Hua sighed and squatted down. He reached out his hand to pick up the spear tip that had fallen to the ground. After all, he had exchanged everything for this spear tip. Even if it was trash, he still had to keep it. The spear tip is so heavy. Xiao Hua squatted down and saw clearly that the ground of Yi was originally paved with huge bluestone. When the spear tip fell to the ground, it actually smashed the entire bluestone. Of course, the ground of Yi had a restriction array. The bluestone on the ground was not really smashed, but the restriction array on the bluestone was broken. When Xiao Hua squatted down, the cracked restriction array had already begun to gradually recover. Are you kidding me? Xiao Hua stared dumbfoundedly at the broken restriction array on the ground. How familiar was this situation to him? Wasn't this the result of him using force to break the restriction array? All of a sudden, Xiao Hua's eyes brimmed with fervor. He had a new idea. The sorrow of having been robbed clean of everything had long since been tossed to the highest heavens. His heart was once again filled with joy, disbelief, and shock. Xiao Hua did not immediately pick up the spear tip. Instead, he first maintained his squatting position and looked around. The surrounding situation was the same as before. No one was interested in this unlucky guy. Then, Xiao Hua reached out and grabbed the back half of the spear tip. With a slight force, the spear tip was held in Xiao Hua's hand. No one could see the weight of the spear tip at this time. Then, Xiao Hua clapped his hand without hesitation and threw the spear tip into the storage bag. But just as the spear tip entered, Xiao Hua suddenly felt the storage bag sink. It was very different from when he put things in before. He immediately opened it again and saw that the tip of the spear tip had sunk into the storage bag. He could not see it clearly. This. Xiao Hua frowned. Needless to say, he already understood that it was not that the spear tip could not be put into the storage bag. It was just that his storage bag was really old. He was afraid that the space inside the storage bag was unstable. The spear tip was really too heavy. If it was placed there for too long, the entire storage bag would be destroyed. Thinking that this was a storage bag that he had exchanged spirit stones for, Xiao Hua immediately felt distressed. He hurriedly raised the storage bag, and with a very hidden movement, he put the spear tip into the space in his mind. Fortunately, there was no change in the space. Damn it, in the future, I can't put anything valuable in the storage bag. I'll just treat it as a cover. Thinking about how he had been robbed by Shi Wuming for no reason, Xiao Hua's heart was bleeding. It was really an unexpected disaster. If he could have put less things in the storage bag, he would have suffered less losses. This old monster Shi is really too much. Why did he force a deal without any reason? Why did he have to force someone to sell him a magic tool? Xiao Hua could not help but wonder. Moreover, he only let me know his name. Humph, only a fool would believe that by saying his name, he would be able to escape with his life. Fellow Taoist, please appraise them. Xiao Hua said confidently. It's best to have spiritual herbs. They're more useful than any spirit stones. What my Imperial Pill School needs to concoct medicinal pills are old spiritual herbs. The female cultivator was not surprised. She smiled and prepared the yellow talismans and saltpeter. But, fellow Taoist, these spiritual herbs. The female cultivator straightened her body and asked. Here, fellow Taoist, please take a look. Just now, there were already cultivators who took out spiritual herbs that were more than 100 years old. Xiaohua's courage grew a bit and he took out a few spiritual herbs that were more than 200 years old. Alas, Xiaohua had no other choice. He actually wanted to take out some of the younger ones, but the ones in the space behind his head were all planted early on in Yellow Flower Ridge. All of them were around 200 years old. He couldn't reduce them even if he wanted to. Seeing the spiritual herbs in Xiaohua's hand, the female cultivator's eyes lit up. She didn't look very surprised and only praised, "Fellow Taoist, you're indeed skilled in concocting medicinal pills. These spiritual herbs are also old enough. They're the best quality spiritual herbs that my humble sect has seen today." As she said that, she handed over the yellow talismans, saltpeter, and other items in her hand. When Xiaohua took them, he also handed the spiritual herbs to the female cultivator. The female cultivator counted them and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist, these spiritual herbs are indeed a bit too much. How about this, I give fellow Taoist some more yellow talismans and saltpeter." "There's no need. Fellow Taoist, if it's cheap, how about I take one of your precious school's medicinal pills?" Xiaohua said with a smile. The female cultivator shook her head. "That won't do. Fellow Taoist, you don't have enough spiritual herbs." "Hee, since that's the case, I can only give my last spiritual herb to fellow Taoist." As Xiaohua said that, he took out another spiritual herb and handed it over. Chapter 13:26. And, with this spiritual herb, although it's still not enough, it's not far from it. The female cultivator was very straightforward. She took the spiritual herb, and without saying anything else, she took out a variety of medicinal pills, put them into a jade bottle, and handed it to Xiaohua. Xiaohua was overjoyed. He reached out to take it, and after thanking her, he hesitated for a moment, then asked tentatively, "Fellow Taoist, I want to ask, does your sect have pill recipes to exchange?" "Pill recipes?" The female cultivator was stunned, and her face immediately froze. She said coldly, "Fellow Taoist, are you joking with me? Pill recipes are the same as cultivation techniques. Every sect treasures them, so who would exchange them for no reason? Since fellow Taoist is also exchanging for pill refinement, could it be that fellow Taoist also wants to exchange pill recipes? Hee, if fellow Taoist has such intentions, please take them out. My Imperial Pill School will accept them all. Moreover, we'll accept them at all costs." Xiaohua blushed. Fortunately, he was wearing a camouflage cloak, so he wasn't afraid of being seen by others. He turned around and left the stall. The female cultivator didn't pay attention to him. She only thought that Xiaohua was teasing her, so she turned around and greeted the others. "Sigh, not only are cultivation techniques hard to find, pill recipes are also hard to find. Although Sect Master has refined the Peiyuan pill before, I only watched from the side and didn't know the details. Even if I had spiritual herbs, I wouldn't have been able to refine it." Xiaohua was somewhat depressed. Being a loose cultivator is indeed very difficult. Fortunately, I've already found a way to cultivate quickly. Coupled with the fact that I can refine yellow talismans, although I'm much slower than ordinary people, at least other people can run while I walk. It's much better than crawling like a snail. Xiaohua comforted himself as he thought. His eyes also looked around. He didn't give up on his evil intentions, hoping for some kind of miracle. Unfortunately, even when the stall was about to end, he still didn't see any words related to pill recipes. "Forget it, I'd better exchange for some talisman crafting materials. When I return to the inn later, I still have to craft talismans and cultivate." Xiaohua extinguished his thoughts. He casually stopped at a stall and picked out talisman brushes, talisman ink, and talisman paper. Xiaohua was a bit conflicted. "What do you think?" They don't want spiritual herbs, they only want spirit stones. Fellow Taoist, you can take I's spiritual grasses and exchange them with other stalls. Why do you want spirit stones? Xiaohua was very puzzled. Fellow Taoist, I'll be returning to the mountain tomorrow to pack up a few things and wait for the trade fair in 10 days. My sect isn't good at concocting pills, so I want fellow Taoist spiritual plants to trade for items. Rather than using spiritual plants to trade for items, it would be better to directly use spirit stones. Could it be that fellow Taoist didn't see this? With that, he pointed. When Xiaohua looked, he saw that it was written very clearly, spirit stones only. All right. Xiaohua looked at the sky and remembered that there was still a mid-grade spirit stone on the body of the puppet in his space. He had no choice but to conceal it and take out the spirit stone from his space. Looking at the spirit stones Xiaohua handed over, that cultivator shook his head and said, Fellow Taoist, these spirit stones, have you used them before? Yes. Xiaohua didn't deny it and calmly asked, Fellow Taoist, won't you accept these spirit stones? Hehe, it's not that I won't accept them, but fellow Taoist should also know that the spiritual energy of the world inside a used spirit stone has already been reduced. It can't be used as a complete spirit stone for exchange. Xiaohua naturally didn't know about this, but he also didn't say anything. He only smiled and said, then fellow Taoist can just follow the rules. And, although fellow Taoist has used these spirit stones before, the quality is still good. They should be able to be exchanged for 80 low-grade spirit stones. If fellow Taoist feels that it's appropriate, I can deduct the spirit stones used to craft these talismans and exchange the remaining spirit stones for fellow Taoist. After waiting for Xiaohua to nod, that cultivator took out 10 low-grade spirit stones. Xiaohua sweated profusely. Fortunately, he only chose a broken talisman brush. Most of the materials were talisman paper and talisman ink. This incomplete mid-grade spirit stone could still be used. Xiaohua received the spirit stones and hurriedly returned to the inn. At this moment, he didn't have any spirit stones in his storage pouch, and the inn didn't allow people to owe money. Tomorrow, Xiaohua had to bring back some mid-grade spirit stones to continue the account. Although there were spiritual plants in the space, wouldn't it take a lot of time to obtain them? If he exchanged them, then there would be one less. It was far cheaper to refine yellow talismans, a method that could be used to cultivate and exchange for spirit stones. After entering the inn's room, Xiaohua opened the restriction. After adjusting his breathing for a moment, he began to refine yellow talismans. First, he made several fireball talismans, then several confinement talismans. When Xiaohua once again dipped his 10 fingers in talisman ink and prepared to refine the fireball talismans, his heart suddenly stirred. He inwardly said, the talismans used to refine the fireball talismans are simple. The amount of magic power used is also small, but the amount of spiritual chi of heaven and earth wrapped in it is also small. When refining the confinement talismans, the talismans are complex, and the amount of magic power and spiritual chi of heaven and earth used is also extremely large. But why did I use the same amount of talisman ink? Hehe, could it be that when refining yellow talismans, the amount of talisman ink used can also be reduced? Other talisman masters probably wouldn't think of this kind of idea. They only thought of how to perfectly refine yellow talismans, how to use more talisman ink to draw more spiritual chi of heaven and earth into the yellow talismans. They didn't care about using more talisman ink. But our Xiaohua, he was born stingy. Moreover, he was embarrassingly short of money today, so he had no choice but to instinctively consider this kind of matter. Xiaohua was most willing to do things that were frugal. He very carefully controlled his magic power, and used the least amount of talisman ink possible to wrap the spiritual chi of heaven and earth. Sure enough, it was just as Xiaohua thought. The amount of talisman ink could really be reduced. Xiaohua tried a dozen times, until the amount of talisman ink he could use was just barely enough to wrap the spiritual qi of heaven and earth onto the talisman paper. Only then did he stop. When he turned back and carefully calculated, he shockingly discovered that the talisman ink that could only refine 10 fireball talismans in the past, he could actually refine 13 of them now. The amount of talisman ink he could use had increased by 30%. Moreover, when Xiaohua regulated his breathing, he discovered that his magic power had increased by a lot compared to before, and his control of magic power had become more precise. Although the increase in magic power wasn't much, to Xiaohua, any increase meant that he could catch up with the cultivation speed of others a little bit. How could he not be happy? In the midst of his joy, Xiaohua suddenly thought, "E-market will be in 10 days. At that time, there will be even more people coming, and there will also be a lot of things that can be used. It seems that I have to refine more yellow talismans, perhaps I can exchange them for a lot of spiritual stones." That's right, at that time, the spiritual grass can also be exchanged for a good price. That won't do. On the day of E-market, there will definitely be people from the 100 Herbs Gate. If I take out the spiritual grass, it might attract the attention of the 100 Herbs Gate disciples. Although I have the mystic grass, it can't change its shape or hide its cultivation, so I will still be easily recognized by the 100 Herbs Gate. This spiritual grass, I absolutely can't reveal it. Xiaohua unconsciously came to a realization, perhaps, this E-market is already not bad, so it's better not to go to E-market. Xiaohua thought for a moment, but couldn't make up his mind, so he simply stopped thinking about it. He only focused on refining confinement talismans, using all his intelligence and wisdom on the great frugal research of how to use the least amount of talisman ink to attach the most amount of spiritual qi of heaven and earth. It was said that there was no time in cultivation, and refining yellow talismans and earning spiritual stones also had no time. In the blink of an eye, Xiaohua was immersed in refining yellow talismans, taking them to E-market to exchange for spiritual stones, talisman papers, and other things, cultivating. He almost forgot that he still had to join Tianqi. The confinement talismans refined by Xiaohua weren't as good as the fireball talismans he refined. They could only be considered as middle-grade talismans, and there was still a certain gap between them and high-grade talismans. But even so, it still allowed him to earn several hundred middle-grade spiritual stones. After all, that was a high-grade confinement talisman, and middle-grade confinement talismans were also very popular in E-market. Even Xiaohua almost thought of setting up a stall in E-market himself. It's just that Xiaohua didn't see He Zhongyu and Ling Zhongyu for the past few days, and there was no suitable person to ask at E-Bazaar either. Only then did he put down his thoughts, and these two people probably left Jingbua City to prepare for E-City. I've stayed in Jingbua City for so many days, why is there still no news from Tianqi? Xiaohua walked in front of E-market on this day, and suddenly thought, the middle-grade spiritual stone that Senior Qing gave me, I'm afraid it's already been used up. Could it be, there's no chance of joining Tianqi? Thinking about it, it was also very possible. The cultivation method is gone, the pill formula is probably also gone. Xiaohua was a little disappointed, and he couldn't help but have an impulse to send out the summoning talisman, but before his hand touched his ear, he stopped. Relying on others alone, this cultivation will always be dependent. Other individual cultivators can survive and improve their cultivation, why can't I? And, it's that 1,000-feet-old man, right? I heard from the sect master that he could cultivate to the gold core realm, so why can't I? Now I still have a cultivation method for the second layer of the aura refining realm to use, and I still have a lot of time to find a cultivation method. I don't believe I can't walk a path to heaven on my own. Xiaohua's harvest these days filled him with confidence in cultivation, and it was also true. Xiaohua refined yellow talismans every day, comprehended the heavenly Tao, and comprehended cultivation methods. His cultivation increased a little every day, and it was indeed much stronger than when he was in Shanghuaming. Moreover, from the looks of it, as long as he had a source of spiritual stones, there was nothing wrong with living in this inn for a year or so. However, the path of cultivation was very long, so how could he just stay in an inn? Forget it, I'd better earn some spiritual stones first. After all, Tianqi didn't give me a final word. Maybe they still haven't gathered enough talisman masters. Xiaohua shook his head, then strode towards Yi. As soon as he entered, a fourth layer aura refining cultivator turned around from an extremely distant corner. He stared at Xiaohua's back for a long time before quickly chasing after him. Xiaohua had been a little careless these days. Moreover, that cultivator was really far away. Even if Xiaohua stopped to watch, he might not be able to see anything. When Xiaohua entered Yi, he was very familiar with the way. He didn't stop at the nearby stalls and directly walked into Yi. Although Xiaohua was a little relaxed outside Yi, he was still cautious inside. He tried his best not to go to any stalls that he had already been to. There were many similar stalls in Yi, so he didn't have to worry about finding a suitable stall. Chapter 1327. Xiaohua first found a stall and bought a lot of talisman ink and talisman paper, then he didn't stop at all and went to other places. Xiaohua bought mid-grade talisman paper and low-grade talisman ink. Although the quantity wasn't small, he could absolutely not attract the attention of others. Through Xiaohua's experiments these past few days, he found that no matter if it was high-grade talisman ink or mid-grade talisman ink, the fireball talismans he refined were all high-grade. It had nothing to do with talisman ink or talisman paper. However, if he used low-grade talisman paper, he could only refine low-grade confinement talismans. If he used mid-grade or high-grade talisman paper, he could refine mid-grade confinement talismans. Therefore, Xiaohua naturally tried to be as frugal as possible and used the least amount of spirit stones to refine the most yellow talismans. After walking for a while, Xiaohua suddenly felt a little strange and his footsteps slightly stagnated. When he turned a corner, he slightly turned his head to take a look. There were many cultivators behind Xiaohua. Some were foundation establishment cultivators, some were aura refining cultivators, some were covering their faces, and some were swaggering. However, these people were all looking at the stall and no one paid any attention to him, a little cultivator who looked like he was only at the second layer of the aura refining realm. Even if he covered his face, no one would be suspicious. Strange, could it be that I didn't rest well these past few days? Xiaohua frowned and muttered inwardly. Then, with a flash, he went in another direction. After a while, Xiaohua's figure appeared in front of a small yellow talisman stall. Most of the stall was already empty, and there were only a few fireball talismans, ice talismans, and so on. A dark and thin old man was sitting there with his hands hanging down, seemingly bored to death. At this moment, Xiaohua was very familiar with this place. He stepped forward and cupped his hands. "Fellow Taoist, please." "Hee, fellow Taoist, what can I do for you?" The dark and thin old man seemed to understand Xiaohua's meaning and returned the greeting with a smile. "Fellow Taoist, please take a look at this confinement talisman. What do you think?" As he spoke, Xiaohua handed over a confinement talisman. The dark skinny old man nodded as he received it. After carefully looking at it, he nodded slightly and said, "Not bad. It's already very rare and commendable for such a high-level confinement talisman to be refined to such an extent. In my opinion, it should be above the middle grade. Alright, I wonder if fellow Taoist wants to buy it?" Xiaohua was secretly delighted. The old man looked at his empty stall and smiled. Of course. Since fellow Taoist came to find this poor Taoist, it means that you have good intentions. How could this poor Taoist let fellow Taoist down? Please make a bid, fellow Taoist. Xiaohua didn't beat around the bush. He felt a trace of uneasiness in his heart. Well, a middle-grade, high-grade yellow talisman usually costs 120 low-grade spirit stones. I'm sure you know that. If you're willing, I'll pay 100 low-grade spirit stones. What do you think? The old man said sincerely. Fellow Taoist. Xiaohua's expression was unreadable, but his tone was full of regret. He said, I walked all the way here and already saw the market clearly. If it wasn't for the fact that I didn't want to go any further, why would I stop in front of fellow Taoist's stall? Fellow Taoist, you must be fated to give me such a low price. This really hurts. How much do you think is appropriate? The old man's expression didn't change. Normally, I'll pay 140 low-grade spirit stones. Who told I to be fated with you? How about 130? Xiaohua said without any trace of politeness. He, fellow Taoist, I can't take advantage of fellow Taoist's price. I can't agree. If fellow Taoist really wants to make a move, then 110 low-grade spirit stones. The old man looked at Xiaohua and said in a low voice, I know the origin of fellow Taoist's spirit stones. If fellow Taoist agrees, I will give fellow Taoist some benefits. Xiaohua pretended to ponder and said awkwardly, fellow Taoist, you're making things difficult for I. My bottom line is 120 low-grade spirit stones. If it's less, I won't be able to report back. Then forget it. The old man waved his hand and said, your bottom line is too high. I can't deal with it. Fellow Taoist, please go to the side and take a look. Oh, okay, Xiaohua nodded and said with a smile, then fellow eyes 200 or so middle-grade yellow talismans will benefit others. What? 200 or so talismans? The old man became anxious when he heard this and said, fellow Taoist, you said we were fated. Why didn't you say so earlier? I want all of these yellow talismans. Don't, fellow eyes yellow talismans are 125 low-grade spirit stones each. Fellow Taoist, don't mishear. Xiaohua's voice was a bit hoarse. 125. The old man was stunned when he heard this, but then he said with a smile, there's nothing to say. Fellow Taoist, we're fated. I accept this price. The old man was very clear that most of the talismans in EG were 5 elements yellow talismans. High-grade confinement talismans like this were still too few. If there were confinement talismans in his stall, not to mention that each one could be sold for 150 low-grade spirit stones, there would be many people buying confinement talismans along with 5 elements yellow talismans. Then fellow Taoist, please prepare the spirit stones. Xiaohua said with a smile, I have 230 confinement talismans. Okay, it should be 287 middle-grade spirit stones and 50 low-grade spirit stones. I'll sell it to you for 290 middle-grade spirit stones. I don't know if fellow Taoist wants middle-grade spirit stones or high-grade spirit stones. The old man said very quickly. I'll take middle-grade spirit stones. I won't be able to share high-grade spirit stones with senior brothers when I go back. Xiaohua nodded. Okay. The old man said while dividing the spirit stones in the storage bag. He said with a smile, fellow Taoist, you have so many yellow talismans. Actually, you can also occupy a stall yourself. Xiaohua's heart moved, but he immediately waved his hand and said, I'm just running errands. I don't care about anything else. Occupying a stall is a bit troublesome. It's easy to attract attention. Ha, fellow Taoist, you're thinking too much. The old man reached out and took the storage bag Xiaohua handed over. He put all the spirit stones inside, then took the confinement talismans Xiaohua handed over. He said with a smile, you only need to pay Jingbua City a low-grade spirit stone every day. Anyone can set up a stall here. Fellow Taoist, you're wearing camouflage clothing. who would know who you are? That's true. Xiaohua said with a smile, but he immediately took the storage bag and waved his hand, saying, I still have to cultivate more. I don't have the time to deal with this. Hehe, since fellow Taoist doesn't want to do it, if these yellow talismans are cheap in the future, come and give them to I. The old man cupped his hands and said. Xiaohua didn't immediately answer. He lowered his head and pondered. He looked back several times and didn't see any eyesores. Then, he raised his head and said with a smile, if fellow Taoist has some pill recipes here that you can provide to I can naturally consider it. Alas, fellow Taoist, you're asking for too much. The old man smiled bitterly. My Yen Xing sect only uses yellow talismans to maintain. We don't have pill recipes. Fellow Taoist, you're really making things difficult for I. Xiaohua didn't say anything. He cupped his hands and was about to leave. The old man said again, however, there are many cultivators on the day of the exchange. Fellow Taoist, you can come and take a look with your sect's senior brothers. Maybe you can come across some ordinary pill recipes. Thank you, fellow Taoist. Xiaohua nodded and left. After waiting for a while, Xiaohua nimbly hid in a remote place. He stuck out half of his head and stared at the yellow talisman stall just now. He saw that there weren't many people in front of the stall just now. After the old man wrote a few words, the number of people patronizing the stall also increased. However, after the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, those people gradually dispersed. Among them, there wasn't anyone that could attract Xiaohua's attention. It's really strange. Could it be that I'm a bird frightened by the twang of a bough? Xiaohua was depressed. Just as he was about to turn around, he heard a rather familiar voice in front of him shouting, this is just an ordinary jade pendant. How dare you ask for a piece of top-grade spirit stone? Xiaohua was greatly surprised. He looked as far as he could and saw a group of people surrounding a stall. The voice was coming from there. Xiaohua, who quickly walked over to take a look, didn't expect that right after he left the stall, a cultivator dressed in camouflage clothes would walk over and point at the words written by the dark-skinned cultivator. He said in a hoarse voice, fellow Taoist, you actually have a confinement talisman here. You didn't seem to have one just now, right? The dark and thin old man said with a smile, I didn't have one just now, but that doesn't mean I don't have one now. I don't know if fellow Taoist needs it. This is comparable to a high-grade confinement talisman. I only sell it for 160 low-grade spirit stones. And, the price can be considered okay, but I want more. Do you have enough confinement talismans in your house? The dark and thin old man didn't doubt him and said with a smile, I have a lot of them waiting for the day of the exchange. If fellow Taoist really wants them, I'll give you 10 low-grade spirit stones for each yellow talisman. I have more than 200 talismans here. Ah! The cultivator was clearly somewhat shocked and almost couldn't believe it. What? Do you think I's price is too high? The dark and thin old man sneered, it will be the exchange market in a few days. I'm afraid the price of this confinement talisman will rise to 2 mid-grade spirit stones. If fellow Taoist doesn't make a move now, it will be over when the time comes. And at this time, there were also several cultivators who were attracted by the black-armed old man's handwriting and walked over. Sigh, let's think about it again. That cultivator was somewhat hesitant, but the dark and thin old man didn't care and turned to greet the others. That cultivator stood for a moment and followed the few cultivators who left. Although Xiaohua was watching from afar, how could he know the conversation? Even if he heard it? What could he know? How could he possibly know that under that bewilderment, there was a face filled with greed whispering, 150 low-grade spirit stones for a confinement talisman and 2 white-yellow talismans, then, how many spirit stones would that be? This guy has been continuously appearing in the exchange market for many days, I'm afraid. Could it be that there are already a few top-grade spirit stones in that storage pouch? That cultivator was also cautious. After leaving the stall, he didn't turn back and didn't look in the direction where Xiaohua left. After walking for a long time, he turned back and looked around. Xiaohua heard a familiar voice and walked towards the crowd. When he got closer, he saw a person standing in front of a stall with a mess of things. He couldn't help but feel strange. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.